Hey, welcome to the channel. In this video, you're going to become a back-end developer. You're going to do this by building and deploying a basic web app with me step by step. Along the way, we're going to learn about things like Node.js and Express.js, how to submit forms and process them on the server, so how to validate and sanitize user input. We're going to learn about user registration, like letting users log in, log out, sign up for an account, so on and so forth. We'll learn about middleware, cookies, JSON Web Tokens. Working with a database, we're going to be using SQLite. We're going to learn how to configure a Linux machine to host a Node app, and we're going to learn how to deploy our simple app up onto that server. Now, speaking of those last two items, configuring and deploying a server, that brings us to the sponsor of this video, which is DreamHost and their Dream Compute plans. Dream Compute servers offer full root access and full control at affordable prices, so their basic plan is just $4.50 a month. At the end of this video, after we build our app together, I'm going to walk through how to provision an Ubuntu computer and how to host our app, and we will deploy it together step by step, and I'm going to be using DreamHost's Dream Compute. Those are universal and transferable skills that we're going to be learning, so before we jump into the action, I just want to give a huge thank you to DreamHost for sponsoring this video and making the entire thing freely available here on YouTube. Now, at this point, let's take a quick sneak peek preview of the finished product of what we're going to be building together in this video. So here's the home page. If you don't already have an account, you can create a new one. I'm going to log into an existing account. So I'll log into my Kitty Doe account with the ultra secure password of QWERTY. So it says, "Hello Kitty Doe, here are your posts." Now before I show off the edit and delete features, I do want to let you know that we don't waste any time in this video on styling and CSS. We use this really cool file called Simple CSS, which gets us this baseline, but we don't waste any time in this video focusing on like HTML and CSS classes or anything like that. We stay very focused on the back-end tasks at hand. But anyways, you can click on one of your posts to view it. So here you can see there's even bold content, posted on date. You can click to edit it. So like I could add, 3 exclamations to the title, maybe add a few exclamations in the body content, click save changes, that gets persisted in the database. Or if I wanted to go to a different post, like maybe an excellent post, and I want to delete this post, I can click this. You see it gets deleted. I could delete this one. If I delete all of them, now I see, "Hello Kitty Doe, you do not have any posts." Awesome. If I wanted to, I could use this button to create a new post, or if I wanted to log out, awesome. So this is what we're going to build together in this video. That's enough for this intro. Now let's actually dive into the real action and get started building. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is start with a brand new empty folder. So I have one on my desktop, and we just want to open this up with your text editor. So I'm using VS Code as my text editor. If you don't have a text editor, that's totally fine. You can just visit the official website. It's code.visualstudio.com. Anyways, then on Mac, you would just drag your folder onto the dock icon for VS Code. Or if you're on Windows, I believe you can just drag this onto a new VS Code window. Okay, but you'll know that you opened up a folder if you have this left-hand File Explorer area. And from here, we just want to use our built-in terminal. So if you press Control-J on Windows or Command-J on Mac, that'll toggle your terminal down here. And the command that I want to run requires you to have Node.js installed on your computer. Now, if you followed along with a few web development tutorials on YouTube in the past, you might already have Node installed on your computer. You can check if you just type in Node --version and press enter. If you see some sort of version number, then great, you already have Node. You can just move on and not worry about it. But if you don't see that, if you see command not found or command unknown, just go ahead and visit the official Node.js website and get it installed. All of the default options are great, so you should be able to just click next through the installation. Cool, but from this point forward, I'm going to assume that everyone has Node installed. All right, so now the question becomes, how are we going to get started in this project folder? Simple, run this command with me. npm, which stands for Node Package Manager, and we're going to init or initialize our project and say -y for yes to the defaults. So go ahead and press enter. That creates a package.json file in our new folder, right? Now the job of this file is to keep track of all of your dependencies. So now let's go ahead and install the core dependency for this entire project. By the way, throughout this tutorial, if you see me typing in clear in my terminal, that's just to bring my cursor back up to the top of this screen so that it's not, falling off the bottom of the screen recording. You don't need to type in clear when you see me do that. But here's the command I want to run. Let's say npm node package manager, right? And then install, and the name of the package that we want to install is called Express. So npm install Express. Go ahead and press enter. Cool. Now we don't ever need to go into this node modules folder, but essentially, we basically just went out to the grocery store and we've listed that as a dependency here, and now we have all of the files that we could possibly need in this folder. So now we can create our own code file and just reference that package, that Express package. So in the root of our project folder, let's create a new file. So you can just right click anywhere in this sidebar area and click new file. The name of the file doesn't matter. You could name it pizza.js or unicorn.js. But just so you and I are on the same page, let's name it server.js. Okay. In this brand new file up at the very top, let's pull in that Express package. So const express equals, and then in Node you can say require to pull in a library or package. And the name of the package is Express. Cool. And then on the next line, let's say const app. I'm just making this up. I'm just naming our variable app, but we're just going to say that is, and then just an instance of Express. So call the Express function. Awesome. Now check this out. Let's set up a route for when you visit like the home page of our server. You would just say app.get. So in web development, there are GET requests when you're trying to retrieve data. There are POST requests when you're trying to like submit a form. So a GET request is like when you just try to visit a URL. Now we're going to give this function two things, two arguments. So a comma b as placeholders. The first thing is the URL pattern that we're trying to match. So let's say quotes, and for the root, oops, not a dot. That was a typo. A forward slash. This just means like the root of your domain. Okay, and then the b placeholder. This is a function that we give it. Now you could spell out, function, parentheses, curly brackets, or in modern JavaScript, what you're going to see quite often is an arrow function. So that's empty parentheses, arrow symbol, which is just equal, greater than, and then curly brackets, and then you can drop down in between. Cool. Now in these parentheses, they're not going to stay empty for long. We want to say req, comma, res. So Express is going to give us access to request and response. And then inside the body of this function here, we can use them to our heart's desire. So what we're going to do now, just for a really quick example, is say response.send, and let's just say hello world from our cool app. All right, and then one last thing before we can test this out, down at the bottom of our file, let's just say app.listen. Let's tell our application to listen on port 3000. So go ahead and save this file. And now how do we tell this to start running? Simple. Down in your terminal, just say node and then the name of this file. So it's server. You don't need to include the .js. It'll work if you say .js, but you don't need it. So just node server. This will now run for all eternity, or until you turn your computer off. But now let's go try to visit it in our web browser. So in a new tab, just visit localhost 3000. Awesome. There we see that message, hello from our cool app. Before we move any farther, I do want to address probably one of the most common points of confusion. So if you try to update this message, like if I try to add on 3 exclamations at the very end of the text, I hit save, and then I hit refresh in the browser, notice you don't see that updated message here. This is because Node apps get loaded into memory, so in order to see that change, you would need to go into your terminal, press Control-C to stop that task, and then fire it up again. So say node server, hit enter. Now if you refresh, you get the idea. However, from a developer experience perspective, that is not very smooth. We shouldn't need to restart the task manually. So you can go ahead and press Control-C to stop it. And let me show you sort of an industry standard way to handle this. We're going to install a package. So say npm install, and its name is nodemon, like node monitor. So just nodemon, go ahead and press enter. Okay, now let me show you how we're going to use that. Go into your package.json file over here in the sidebar, not packagelock.json, just package.json. And we're looking for this scripts area. So in this scripts object, inside the object, but right above test, or it could be below test, but inside of scripts, let's say, and you could make up any name, but it's customary to call it dev. and then quotes, and then you give it a command. So we're just going to say nodemon should call our server file. And then be sure to end that with a comma. So the idea is instead of saying node server, we're using the nodemon package, and it is going to automatically refresh our server-side app every time we save a change to a related file. So you can hit save, you can close that file. And then down in the command line, now instead of saying node server, you would say npm run dev. So this is a very common phrase in the Node world. Pretty much regardless of any project you inherit or work on, you're going to be running this command, npm run dev. Cool. So now you can refresh your browser. Cool. And then if I change this to just be like a period, hit save, we don't need to even touch our terminal. If you refresh, there's the change. At this point, your next thought is probably, hey, this doesn't seem like a very organized or nice place to spell out like a big block of HTML. And you'd be right. We should instead use the right tool for the job. We need a template engine. Now, there are a bunch to choose from, but let me show you how to use my favorite one. It's called EJS. We're going to need to install a package from npm. Now, instead of stopping or pressing Control-C to stop this task, what I like to do is leave it running and then use this icon, this plus symbol icon in VS Code to open up a second terminal. And now in this second terminal, we can say npm install. And the name of the package we want to install is simply EJS. Go ahead and press enter. Cool, let's hide our command line. And now we just want to tell our Express app to use EJS. Now we need to do this before we start spelling out any of our URL patterns. So for example, like right here, we can just say app.set, and then we're going to give this two things. So a comma b as placeholders. The first thing we're going to give it is quotes view engine. And the second thing we're going to give it is which view engine do we want to use? Let's just say quotes EJS. Now, with just that in place, you can go ahead and save that. Now, we can just create a new folder in our sidebar, and it needs to be named views. So plural, views. This is the default folder that Express and EJS will look in. And now in that new folder, we can create a file. Let's call it like homepage.ejs, right? So instead of like HTML, it's .ejs. In this brand new empty file, let's just say hello from our template file. Go ahead and save that. And now let's see how we can render that. Instead of saying response.send, let's say response.render. And then in the function call, you just give it the name of the template. So we named it homepage. You do not need to include the .ejs, just the file name before the extension, so homepage. If we save that and then refresh in the browser, there we see hello from our template file. Now, I realize this is a video about back-end development, but for just a moment, let's address the unstyled elephant in the room. We probably want at least a little bit of styling. But don't worry, we are not going to go off on a 30-minute tangent about Tailwind or Bootstrap or anything like that. Lately, when you're learning back-end development, there's this really cool CSS file that I'm a big fan of. I just discovered this a couple of weeks ago. It's called Simple CSS. You can find it at simplecss.org. And the idea behind this is you don't even need to add classes to your elements. If you just have things like header, footer, main, nav. Now, obviously, you're not going to win any design awards. It's going to look just like the way that this website looks. But the idea is if you're just trying to learn back-end development, how to work with a database, how to output useful HTML on the front, like your different route patterns, I think this is really cool. It lets you have something that at least like makes sense that you can scroll through and click through, but you're not having to use any of your brain's horsepower on, worrying about class names and div and layout and styling. So anyways, to get started, here's what you do. So from their homepage, I would just click this Get Started with Simple.css. It says there are many ways to install it. I actually just want to host it on my server. I don't want to install it as a package or from some third-party server. So in this very first option here where it says minified version, I'd probably just grab this URL and just visit that in a new tab. And then I'm literally just going to copy the entire content. So Control A or Command A and then Control or Command C to copy that into your clipboard. And let's do this. Back in VS Code, in the root of our folder, let's create a folder named public. And then inside of it, you can create a new file. Let's name it like styles.css. You guessed it, just paste in your clipboard, hit save. And now let me show you how we can load that on the front end. Go back into server.js. And right below this view engine line, let's just make the public folder available. So you just say app.use parentheses, and then inside of there, you're just going to call express.static parentheses to call that, and just give it quotes public. Cool. Now, if you save that, we just need to go into our homepage file, and let's spell out a basic HTML template. So within this file, you can say, hey, pardon the quick interruption, but in that file, I was going to let you know about a few tab triggers, and I just realized they won't work inside of an EJS file unless you have the same extension installed that I do. So just to save you some frustration, if you use this icon in VS Code, it's the extensions icon in your sidebar here. And then if you search for an extension that has the name of EJS, we're interested in this one. It's called EJS Language Support by Digital Brainstem. It has over 1 million installations. Just go ahead and click Install, make sure it's installed and enabled. And that way, throughout the remainder of this lesson, whenever you and I are inside an EJS file together and you see me typing in little shortcuts and then hitting Tab on the keyboard, you will have that same ability that I do. It's all thanks to that extension. Anyways, let's get back on track with the action. DOC and then hit Tab. It's going to give you, a basic skeleton. Up at the top, let's include a doc type. So just less than exclamation. There it is, doc type HTML. Cool. Now below the title, let's have a style sheet. So just link, hit Tab, and then for the href, it's just slash to look at the root of the domain, and we named it styles.css. Now down in the body area, let's do this. Let's have a header area, and inside of that, let's have like a heading level 2 with a link. For now, just a hashtag, and let's say, actually not even a hashtag, just a / to go to the root of our domain, and let's say our wonderful app. And then below the heading level 2, we can have like a nav element. We don't even need to worry about an unordered list and a list. Let's just have an A element that says like login. And then below the header, let's have our main area. So just the HTML5 main tag. For now, let's just have like a heading level 3 that says, hello, this is the home page. And then maybe like a filler paragraph. You can just hit lorem, hit tab. Cool. And then below that, let's have a footer. So just the HTML5 footer tag. Inside there, I'd probably have like a small tag. And then let's just say like, the copyright symbol. So ampersand copy semicolon. Let's say like our wonderful app. Cool, let's save that, and we didn't have to worry about classes or anything, but if you look at our front end and refresh, cool. Again, we're not going to win any design awards, but the fun part is now we can, for the remainder of this video, we can focus 100% on the back end. Things like databases, JSON Web Tokens, data validation, so on and so forth, and we at least have something that you can click through and it makes sense. At this point, let's start building out the functionality. Let's set it up so that when you click on the login link, it takes you to a separate, /login page. So in our homepage EJS, there's the link. Now instead of a hashtag, it would be, /login. And now currently, if you tried to visit that, you'd run into an error message. But we just want to go into our server.js file and set up a route or a URL pattern for that /login. So you would say app.get. This time it's /login in the parentheses, comma, and then let's give it an arrow function. So request, response, arrow function, and let's say response.render, and we can go create a template called login. So let's save that and then go into the views folder, create a new file, call it login.ejs. To save some typing, let's just borrow all the code from homepage.ejs, just duplicate it into this file. And let's just change this heading level 3 to say login page. Let's give that a save. So now if you refresh, I can click on login. There's that page. I can click this link to go back to the home page. Nice. Now, before we actually make the login page have a form that you can submit, well, it doesn't really make sense to let users log in if they haven't created an account first. So in other words, before we bring this page actually to life, let's go to the home page. Let's have our home page set up so that if you're not currently logged in, you see a user registration form, like, create an account because you don't already have one. So let's go into our homepage template, homepage.ejs, and inside the main area, let's get rid of the paragraph and the heading level 3. Let's start fresh inside the main, and let's have a field set, and then hit tab. Inside of that, let's start with a legend element. So hit tab and say like create an account. And then below that, let's have a label for the input. Let's say label for username. And then this is a styling detail, but I would probably wrap the actual text inside a small tag and say username. And then below that, we can have the actual input. So type is text. Let's say the ID matches the label value. So this is username. The name should be username. And then it's always a pet peeve of mine when autocomplete is enabled, so I like to turn that off. Cool, then I would probably just duplicate these label and input lines for the password. So below that, after copying that, I would just paste it in. And then you could just select username here and then press Control D to select the next instance. And on Mac it would be Command D, but just press that again and again, and then you can change it all in one fell swoop. Hit escape on your keyboard. This was supposed to be uppercase though. Cool. Oh, and then of course this for type value should be password, so they just see asterisks. Cool, then below the input, let's have a line break. So a BR element, self-closing. Let's have a button that says sign up. Cool, let's give that a save. So that gets us, if we refresh this, again, we're not gonna win any design awards, but I mean, this is pretty nice for writing 0 CSS, and we didn't even have to add any classes. At this point, now let's ask and answer the question, how in the world, like if a user types something into these fields and clicks sign up, how can we access the values that they typed in from our server side? So let's give ourselves a goal. Before we worry about tying into a database, let's just try to log these values within our, our server's terminal. So the first step, if we go to the home page, and you can see I haven't had my second cup of coffee today. So obviously we would need an HTML form element. So at the start of this, I would just wrap this in a form tag, and then at the very end of that, I would have the closing form tag. Now on the opening tag, we just need to give it an action, and this is a URL. So let's point, and we could make this up, but let's say like /register. And then we do want to make sure to set the method to all uppercase post. If you're curious what this means, if you set it to get, well, first of all, you don't need to set it to get, it's get by default. But if we tried that out, let me show you what normally happens. So like if I say ABC and a password of ABC, if you click sign up, notice a get request just literally passes it along like in the address bar. There are your values, ABC and ABC. So let's go back. You want to set this to a post for the method. So a GET request is when the user is trying to retrieve or get data. It's actually great for forms when you're building like a search results form, right? Because you might search for something and you want sort of a bookmarkable or shareable URL based on your search term. But when you're signing up for an account, it doesn't make any sense to have that as a GET request. So I would say like 8 or 9 times out of 10 when you're having a form, it's probably going to be a post request. Anyways, let's give this a save. And now let's worry about actually spelling out this URL pattern in server.js. So up until now, we've been saying app.get. Now we can say app.post. Again, we're going to give that 2 things. The first argument is the URL pattern, and that we named it /register. So when someone sends a post request to this URL, what do we want to do? Well, let's just have an arrow function, request response. And in order to access those username and password values, we do need to enable a feature in Express. So up here, right after we set the EJS template line, let's say this. Let's say app.use, parentheses, express.url encoded, parentheses to call it, give it a configuration object, and set extended to false. Now, you might be wondering, what in the world did this line of code do? It made it so that now we can access the values that the user typed in by just saying request.body. So check this out. Let's just say console.log, just so we can see it in the console or the terminal. Let's say request.body. And then to end the request, we don't want the request to just hang and spin forever. So let's say like response.send, thank you for filling out the form. Let's give that a save and then open up your terminal. And so now let's pay attention to this area. Let's go submit the form. So let me refresh, get a clean slate. I'll say my username is Brad, and I'll say my password is Cordy. Click submit. Cool, we see that thank you message, but more importantly, awesome. Down in the command line of the terminal, we see username is Brad, password is Corty. So at this point, we now have everything we need. So now in the body of this function, we don't just want to log it to the console, we want to validate the data. So we want to make sure, let's go back here, that the username is like, for example, is at least 3 characters long and doesn't contain any odd or special characters. And we need to make sure that the password is at least 6 or 8 characters long, right? And that it's a secure password. Like, we need to make sure that these values are logical, that they're secure, and then if it passes all of our rules or validation, then we would actually want to store it in a database somewhere. So let's start building out that validation right now. So in this function, let's get rid of the console.log. We don't need that. I'm actually going to begin with creating a variable and name it errors. And let's set it to square brackets, opening and closing square brackets, an array. And now if and when we run into validation errors, I'm going to push new messages onto this array. Now, before we check for validation rules, I want to first make sure that there's nothing odd going on, and I want to make sure that these values are strings of text. So I'm just going to say if type of request.body.username does not double equal sign, so exclamation equal equal. If that does not equal a string, then I'm just going to set it to be request.body.username, just empty quotes. I would do the same thing for password too. So I would change this to password in both instances, here and here. Cool, now I would actually start spelling out the rules. So let's say like if they don't fill out the username field at all. Actually, before we do that, I'd probably want to trim any white space on the username. So I would say just request.body.username equals request.body.username and then call the trim method. Cool, so if they accidentally include a space at the beginning or the end, we'll just remove that for them. Cool, but now I would say, like if they leave it completely empty, let's include the appropriate error message. So I would say like if, and as long as it evaluates to something, it would be true. So if we just say request.body.username and then include an exclamation here to check for the opposite, if it evaluates to false like this, that means they didn't provide one. So in that case, I would just say errors.push, you must provide a username. All right, let's set it up so if their username like isn't at least 3 characters long, I would say like if request.body.username. So if it evaluates to something and ampersand, and if request.body.username.length is less than 3, then I would just say errors.push. Username must be at least 3 characters. All right, then below that, let's say like username cannot be more than 10 characters. So I would just duplicate that rule and say if length is greater than 10, and then let's just change the message. Username cannot exceed 10 characters. Okay, next up, let's make sure that they don't have any special characters like parentheses, curly brackets, hashtag, exclamation, anything like that. So I'd say if request.body.username, if it exists, and if it, so exclamation, if it doesn't pass the following test. So exclamation request.body.username, and then call the match function. So this will return either true or false, and then you can spell out a regular expression, and then the string of text will either pass that, like true or false. Does it match? Now, before we fill in the regular expression in these parentheses, let's first just say, like, if this is the case, then we're going to say errors.push. Username can only contain letters and numbers. Cool. Now, for the regular expression in these parentheses, you would just say /, and then it's going to end with a /, but in between the 2 forward slashes, we'll say caret, and then opening square bracket, closing square bracket. After the closing square bracket, we'll say plus, and then $, and now in the square brackets, we fill out the characters that we want to allow. So lowercase a through lowercase z, uppercase a through uppercase z, and then 0 through 9. All right, now we still need to spell out our password validation rules, but before we worry about doing that, let's just test this out. Like, how are we going to use this errors array on the front end? So here's what I have in mind. After those validation checks, let's do this. Let's say if errors.length. So as long as we've pushed even one error onto this array, assuming it's not empty, let's do this. Let's say curly brackets, and then I'll have an else. So if there are errors, if there are problems, let's just return to prevent any further execution of this entire function. And we're just going to say response.render homepage. But here's the thing, we can say comma, and now we can give it a bit of data. So let's give it an object, curly brackets, and just give it our errors variable. So that way we can access the error messages in our EJS template. Else, if there are no errors, for now, let's just move our response.send thank you line to live in this else block, just like this. Cool. Let's save this. And now let's just go into our homepage EJS and towards the top of the form, so maybe inside the form element, but before the field set, let's just display any errors that there might be. So in EJS, you can say less than percentage, and then you can close that out with percentage greater than. But in between there, so where my cursor is right now, well, this is sort of like PHP, if you've ever worked with that before. So outside of this sort of tag, it's just static, regular HTML. But inside this area, in this case, it's JavaScript. So we can just say errors.for each. The E in each is capital, but parentheses to call that. And then we're just going to give it an arrow function with one parameter. So we can just say error, arrow symbol, curly brackets. You can drop down. Now at the end of this line, let's exit EJS. So percentage greater than. And then at the start of this line, let's go back into EJS to close out the for each loop. On this line though, now again, this is similar to traditional PHP. Now we're back into HTML mode. Let's just have a paragraph and let's output the error. Now, really, really big point with EJS. If you're just wanting to go into JavaScript mode, it's, the opening tag with percentage sign. If you're wanting to output or render, this is sort of like PHP's echo. If you're wanting to actually output text, this is how we can safely escape the text. So it's the less than symbol, percentage sign, but the equal sign is important here. The equal at the start of the tag like this is how you safely escape and output text. Cool. Now let's give this paragraph a class of notice. Notice, and that alone should give it some nice styling. So let's go ahead and save this and see if we run into any errors. Let's refresh. So this error message makes perfect sense. It's saying errors is not defined, and that's because when you first visit the home page, you haven't even submitted the form yet. So of course, errors, it's not like an empty array that can be looped through. Now there are probably 100 or 1,000,000 different ways you could solve this, but what I would do is probably just go into server.js, and because this errors array is a pattern I like to use, I would just set it up globally so that it just starts out as an empty array. So maybe up here, before we spell out any URLs, like after this public line, I would just say app.use, parentheses, and then just give it a function. So function, parentheses, curly brackets. Now in these parameters, we're going to have request, response, and next. So this is our first time creating something that's called middleware. Middleware is really useful. It's one of the biggest reasons I like Express. It makes it really easy to set up middleware. Essentially, we can do anything we want to the request and response body objects, and then when we're done, we just call the next function, and that's it. Then it will just continue on with all of the other, like if you visit the /home page, this function is going to run first, and then when we call next, then it will just continue on with just like normal. Hence the name middleware. It's basically like getting in the middle of a request. Anyways, in the body of this function, I'm just going to say response.locals.errors and set that to an empty array. We can go ahead and save. So basically now anytime a request and response lifecycle begins, we're starting out by saying error, and locals is how you make something available to your template or your view system. It's starting out as an empty array, and then when you come to this URL, then if there are errors, it can, overwrite that value, right? When it passes it into the homepage template down here, when we're saying render homepage and give it errors. All right, so let's go back. Let's refresh the homepage. Whoops, I'm so glad I just made this mistake. This is going to save you a lot of frustration. Again, the second cup of coffee is dearly needed right now. So you can see that's going to spin forever. This request will never, ever finish, and that's because I forgot to call next. So again, that's the whole point of middleware. We have request, response, and this next. So after we do what we want to do, right? Like we've gotten in the middle of the request, the job of this middleware is done. So when your job is done, you just call next, and then it can continue on with the rest of the request. So we call next, give that a save, refresh the home page. Let's try to sign up with a username that's only 2 characters long. So you click sign up, awesome. Username must be at least 3 characters. Or like, what if I say Brad, but I have special characters that aren't allowed? Awesome. Username can only contain letters and numbers. Or what if I leave it blank? You must provide a username. Beautiful. Now let's go set up similar rules because we want to validate the incoming password value. So back in server.js, I'd probably just recycle or copy and paste most of these username rules. The only one I don't want is I don't want to check for special characters. You are absolutely allowed to have special characters in a password. But these first three, like you can't leave it blank and it needs to be like a minimum or maximum length. I'll just cut that into my clipboard, and then right below the username values or rules right here, I'll just paste it in, and let's just change this. So I'll select username and then press Control or Command D. Just change all of those instances to password. Hit escape on your keyboard. Now this is supposed to be an uppercase password, and this should be uppercase password. But great, let's change the minimum values. I'm going to say that your password should be, like at least 12 characters long, or you could do 8. But I'll just say password must be at least 12 characters. And then I'll say that your password can't exceed what, like 70 characters. So the message would be change this to a 70. All right, at this point, let's talk about what our next step is. So we have the errors. If there are any errors, we're going to, render that template and display the errors. But if there are no errors, that's the real question of what do we want to do then? And just a quick sidetrack here, we actually don't need to wrap this in an else block. So I'll just delete that entire else block. And my reasoning for this is the code down here will never run if we are error-free, because if there are errors, the word return here is going to make sure that, the function doesn't continue to run. And I don't like to have my code unnecessarily indented. So I like that right here, we're not inside an else block. Just keeps our code a little bit cleaner, I think. Anyways, down here, this means we don't have any errors. So we would want to do two things if we're error-free. Let's write a comment to ourselves. So first of all, we would want to save the new user into a database, right? We want to permanently remember that username and password. And then number two, we can write another comment. We want to log the user in by giving them a cookie. That way we can conditionally show a different homepage depending on whether you're quote-unquote logged in or not. So guest users, when they visit the homepage, they'll see create an account screen, but if you're logged in, you'll see a list of all of your posts. Let's not get ahead of ourselves too far. So in maybe 5 or 10 minutes from now, we can worry about cookies and logging the user in after we sign up. Let's first worry about the database aspect. Now there are many different database systems to choose from, but in this video, we're going to use the simplest one, which is called SQLite. It's really easy to get started. Just open up your command line and go ahead and leave the server running in this tab or this terminal. But in the second terminal where we can install npm packages, let's say this. npm install, and the name of the package is better-SQLite. So it's SQLite, spelled like that, L-I-T-E, and then the number 3. No dash before the 3, just better-SQLite 3. Go ahead and press enter. All right, now let me show you how we can use this. Up at the very top of server.js, let's pull in that package. So up above any of the apps set, just up here when we have like Express, let's do this. Let's say const, and you can name it anything. There's nothing special about this. You can name it pizza, but I'm naming it DB for database, right? And just say that that equals, and then require in, and the package was better-SQLite 3. And then at the very end of that, let's call another pair of parentheses, and let's just name our database file. Again, you could name this anything, but why don't we call it, just so we're on the same page, like our app.db. Okay, and then on the very next line, say this with me. This is just going to improve the performance or speed of the database. Let's say db, and then call the pragma method, and just say quotes, journal underscore mode, and set that to all uppercase WAL. No quotes around this, just quotes around the command as a whole. Cool. All right, at this point, if we save our file, obviously NodeMon is going to restart our app, and you'll notice that now in the sidebar, we have a file called ourapp.db. So this is what's cool about SQLite. That's our database. It's that simple. Now, at this point, let's try to create our users table, right? We want to store users when they sign up or register for an account. So we need to set up sort of the empty table skeleton for what a user is. Essentially, it's just going to have a username and a password. So maybe right after that line, you could write a comment to yourself and say like database setup here. And then you could say like database setup ends here. And now this is where we're going to spell out the database table structure. So let's say like const create tables equals db.transaction. In these parentheses, you give it a function. So let's just give it an arrow function. So empty parentheses, arrow symbol, curly brackets. Okay, and now below this entire block of code, we're going to want to call it. So just call create tables, parentheses, to execute it. Now, up in this function, we just spell out the structure for our table. So let's say db.prepare, parentheses to call that. And then at the end of it, we're going to chain on, so a dot, and call the run method. But the idea now is in these parentheses for the prepare, we get to spell out a SQL statement. So I like to have backticks. This is what, to the left of the 1 key on your keyboard, like right above the tab key. In between there, we are free to drop down onto multiple lines. Here's what we're going to do. Let's say create table if not exists, like if it doesn't already exists. And we'll give the table a name of users, parentheses, and you can drop down in between. And let's say the first column will have a name of ID. It will be an integer. It is the primary key of how we can look up rows, so primary key, and it should auto increment, comma. It should also have a column called username, and that will be a string. You cannot leave it empty, and it must be unique, right? There cannot be more than one row that has the same username, comma. There's a password column, password, and that is a string, and you cannot leave it empty. Cool. Now, if we save this, that's going to refresh our app. That's going to create the table. And now you're probably wondering, well, how can I view the table? Like, how can I make sure that this went through? Well, there are many different ways to view a SQLite database. There are some really excellent VS Code extensions, but I think probably the simplest and best way that I would recommend is this application. So it's called SQLitebrowser.com, or excuse me, not .com, .org. SQLitebrowser.org. It's available for Windows, Mac, and Linux. So you can pause the video if you want to get it installed. It'll look something like this. Now let me open it up on my end. Here it is. And let's just click Open Database and then just choose that file. So for me, it lived on my desktop, and then in my project folder called Our Backend Project, and then it's this file, ourapp.db, not the -shm or -wall, just ourapp.db. Go ahead and open that, select that file. Cool, and there you see under tables, there's one called users, and let's see, if we right click on that and choose browse table, awesome, we have columns of ID, username, and password. So now the question is, how do we insert a new row, right, with like a username of Brad or Cordy, like whatever the user types in to our form here? Well, now that we have that DB variable in server.js, let's just look for our register function. So for me, it's around line 41 in server.js, but the post request for /register. We already have this comment to ourselves, save the new user into a database. So we can just say db dot and then call the prepare method and give it a pair of quotes. And now we just spell out a SQL statement. So insert into the users table, parentheses, and then you spell out the column name. So username, comma, password, and the values, parentheses. And now here's an important note. We don't ever want to manually concatenate a string of text or like generate the string of text ourselves when we're using user input values, because someone could be trying to input a malicious value. So you always want to use the database itself or the driver for the database, its built-in tool to prepare SQL statements. Let me show you what I have in mind here. So we're just going to say question mark, comma, question mark. So we are not going to rely on our own programming skills to like interpolate the dynamic user values here. Question mark is the driver we're using. So it's better SQLite. It is going to handle, hence the name prepare. It is going to prepare a SQL statement for us. So the idea here is at the start of this line, let's not just let this prepared statement sort of float in outer space. Let's save it into a variable. So I would say like const, we could call it like our statement equals db prepare, and then on the very next line of code we can just run it. So our statement dot run. Now here's the important part. We still need to actually give it those dynamic values. So to fill in these two question marks, well, when you call run in these parentheses, you just give it those two arguments. So that would be request.body.username, comma, request.body.password. Now, in a few minutes, we can learn about cookies, but for now, down here, let's just say response.send and say thank you. Let's save this and test it out. So I'll refresh. I'll say, so I'll fill this out without any errors. So I'm following all of the validation rules. I'll click sign up. Whoops. Well, at least this error message is very clear. So I said value instead of plural values. So in our prepared statement, this should not be value singular. It should be values plural. Cool. Let's give that a save. Test it out one more time. Let's go back. Fill out the form, Brad. Cordy, click sign up. We see thank you. Now here's the cool part. If we go into our DB app, and this icon right here is refresh. So click that. Awesome. We have a one row, username of Brad, password of Cordy. Now, before we move on any further, I want to let you know you should never ever store passwords in plain text like this. So before we move on, let's make sure that we're hashing users' passwords. Let's go ahead and delete this row because it has, the insecure plain text password. So just right click on this far left column and choose delete record. And now let's go make sure that we're hashing the password before saving it into the database. Open up your command line, and in this terminal, so not the one where we have nodemon running, but this one, we can say npm install, and we want a package called bcrypt. Go ahead and press enter. Now here's what we're going to do. Up at the very top of our file, let's pull in that package. So you could say const bcrypt equals and then require in bcrypt. And then let's just go down to where we're storing the user in the database. So before we actually store it, let's just make sure we hash their password. So let's say const salt equals bcrypt, call its method of gen salt sync. Let's give it 10 passes, and then we're just going to overwrite request.body.password. It should now equal instead, and then call bcrypt, use the hash sync method, and then you're going to give this two things, a comma b. The first thing is the plain text password, so request.body.password, and then the second value is your salt. Cool. So now that is what will be saved into the database. Let's save that and test it out. Let's go back to the home page, say Brad, Cordy, sign up. Typo. I really need that second cup of coffee. I spelled sync wrong. So hash sync. Try it one more time. Brad, Cordy. I'm really glad we ran into this error together. So we see database is locked. This is because we have pending changes in the DB browser app, right? We deleted that row. So you need to be sure to click this write changes button. Cool. So now the database should not be locked. Let's go try this one more time. So I'll try to sign up. We see thank you. And now if we go back and refresh that table, beautiful. So now if our database ever somehow gets leaked, we are not exposing users' passwords. Now don't worry, a little bit later on when we let users log in, it's very easy to compare their attempted login password with this hashed value. Before we get to that though, before we get to the login feature, let's first set it up so that after you successfully create a new account, you should be automatically logged into that new account. So let's go back to our code in server.js. We already have this comment here that says, we should log that user in that we just created by giving them a cookie. So let's spend a few minutes to learn how in the world you would do that. We just say response.cookie, we call cookie, and we're going to give it three things. So a, comma, b, comma, c. The first thing we give it is sort of a name or label for this cookie. Why don't we call it like our simple app? You can name it pizza, unicorn, whatever, but just so you and I are on the same page. Now the second value, this is the string of text you're wanting the user or cookie to remember. So for now, let's just say like quotes and say super top secret value. We'll circle back to this in just a moment of how we could actually have something useful here. But for now, that's a good starting place. And then the third argument, this is a configuration object. To make our cookie secure, I'm going to drop down. Let's say like HTTP only. Absolutely put that to true. This makes it so that client-side JavaScript cannot access cookies in the browser. They will only just get automatically sent along with every request. Let's also say secure and set that to true. This way the browser will only send cookies if it's an HTTPS connection, not HTTP. The good news is that this will not apply for localhost. So our local dev environment will continue to work, but like once this lived up on the web, then only send cookies over HTTPS. All right, let's also say comma, same site, and set that to strict. Essentially with this in place, we don't really need to worry about CSRF attacks, cross-site request forgery attacks, and CSRF tokens. Essentially, with this in place, the only way that would be a threat is if you had a malicious subdomain, right? So like if you owned mysite.com, if someone got into your hosting somehow and created evil.yoursite.com, well, then in that case, you would wish that you had implemented CSRF tokens. But in our case, I don't think that's really a threat we need to worry about in this video. So this is good enough. And then finally, let's say comma and set a property of max age. So this is in the Express world, this is measured in milliseconds, and it's how long the cookie is good for, like before the cookie will expire. So I would probably start with 1,000, right? Because there's 1,000 milliseconds in a second. And then I would multiply that by 60. That gets us 1 minute. And then I would multiply that by 60. That gets us an hour. And then multiply that by 24. So essentially, I'm just saying, let the cookie be good for 1 day. All right, let's give this a save and test it out. So to test this, we would need to register for a new account. So just go back to your home page. I'll say like barks a lot with a password of QWERTY. Sign up. Now, here's how you can see that cookie in action. You can go back to the home page, right-click and choose Inspect, and click on Application. If you're using Firefox instead of a Chromium-based browser, I believe it would say Storage instead of Application, but then we see cookies. Cookies are unique for each domain, so we're looking for localhost :3000, and there we see it. Our simple app, the name, and the value, super top secret value. So now we just need to learn what should go here instead of, super top secret value. What we actually want is some sort of value that would be unique to this user, right? So we just logged in as barks a lot. So we would want to store like their user ID, like if you look at the database and refresh. So Brad has an ID of 2, barks a lot has an ID of 4. We would want to store their unique ID, but we can't just literally give them a value of like ID equals 2 or ID equals 4. The reason you can't do that is because a malicious person could come to your website and manually go into their browser and create a cookie with this name. And then they could say, like I have a ID value of 4, and they could impersonate whoever they wanted to impersonate. So instead, we need some sort of like cryptographically secure way to essentially give the user a value that they hold on to, but a value that could never be guessed or forged or tampered with. Now, in the real world, you might use sessions, and a session library is going to automatically create a really long, like impossible to guess value. In this video, we're going to use something called JSON Web Tokens. And the same thing is going to happen. It is going to generate a very long and cryptographically secure value, and then we can give that to the user. And then what's going to happen is the web browser sends this back to the server on every request. So like each time you hit the reload icon, the client, the browser, is sending all cookies for this domain back to our back end. So then we can just verify that the value is legitimate. We can make sure that we are the ones that signed it or created it or that it originated from our server. Cool. That's enough rambling. Let's actually just go set that up. So here's what we're going to do. Let's open up our command line. And in this window where we can install packages, let's say npm install. And let's install 2 things. The first thing is called JSON Web Token. So that's JSON Web Token. And then a space, we want another package. Let's go ahead and install something called .env. Go ahead and press enter. Cool. Now let me show you how we're going to leverage those tools. Up at the very top of this file, let's pull in that JSON Web Token package. So you could say const, just for short, so we don't have to type in the full name. I'll call the variable JWT for JSON Web Token, and then just that equals require. The name of the package is JSON Web Token. Cool. Now let's scroll back down to where we were setting that cookie. And right before this line, let's just right about here, let's generate that long secure value that we would want to use here instead. So I would just say like const, and we could call it anything. Why don't we call it like our token value equals, and then we're going to use that JWT variable, and it has a method of sign. In these parentheses, we're going to give it 2 things. Let's actually start with the B placeholder, the second thing we're going to give it. So make sure you have the A, B as placeholders. The second thing we're going to give it is our secret value that only we should know. This is how we can verify that we are the ones that created this long secure value, right? Like when the user sends this back to us, then we can sort of try to decode it using this secret value. Now, in the world of programming, you don't ever want your super secure values like that just resting in your source code. Instead, what you want to do in the sidebar, we want to create a brand new file in the root of our project and give it a name, and it has to be this exact name of .env. This is where you can store environment variables. In this file, let's create a variable called, and it needs to be all uppercase. Let's call it like JWT secret. And you could call this anything. You could call it pizza, but make sure you're spelling this correctly. I've had students misspell the word secret here, or put JTW. If this is even one character off, then it's not going to work. So make sure you're spelling it consistently. Equals, and notice there's no spaces. It's just all crammed together with no spaces. Equals. And now just make up a value. I mean, you could literally just roll your fingers on the keyboard, but let's put like our completely unguessable secret value. I mean, it doesn't matter. Just roll your fingers on the keyboard. Something that no one could ever guess. And then save this file and close it. Cool. Now that's what we want to use here for this B value. Now, how in the world can we access our environment variables from within server.js here? We just go up to the very top of this file, and on the very, very first line, and it needs to be the first line, I believe, we just say require, and then require in .env, and then at the end of that, after the parentheses, you say dot and call config. That's it. Just this line of code now makes it so we can access our environment variables. So scroll back down. For JWT sign, instead of B, this would be process.env. And we named it all uppercase JWT secret. Cool. Now let's circle back to the A placeholder. This is going to be an object, so curly brackets, and we can sort of encode any data we want in here. So we could say like sky color is blue, comma, we could say like user ID should be 4, or whatever user ID from the database that was just created. Let's actually make sure that this is a real value. So don't hard code it to 4 or any number for that matter. Let's actually find out the ID of the row that we just created in the database up on this line. And this is a little bit confusing because in SQLite, notice there is this far left column, which is called the row ID. It is created automatically by SQLite. And then you and I manually created this lowercase ID column. And notice they don't match. They don't match because I have manually deleted a few rows, right? When we had the insecure password, and then off camera, I deleted Barks a lot once. So notice they don't match like the row ID with our ID. So what I'm going to want to do is look up the document. Essentially, I just want to find out this number for the user that was just created. So here's how I would do that. On this line where we're saying our statement.run, at the very start of that line, I don't just want what it returns to float in outer space. I want to hold on to it. So I would say const, and we could just say like result equals our statement.run. And then on the next line, I would look up that item. So you could say like const lookup statement equals db prepare, and then I'm just going to say select everything, so asterisk from users where row ID, so that's the built-in SQLite column, equals question mark. And then on the next line, let's say like const, maybe like our user equals, and then we're going to say lookup statement. This time it's not going to be .run, it's going to be .get. This is how you can actually like retrieve an item, right? Like we're not trying to execute a statement, we're actually trying to also get something back. So now we're just trying to fill in this question mark where row ID equals, and now it's as simple as just saying result dot last insert row ID. Whoops, actually the I is lowercase, just like this. So the only capital letters I believe are the I in insert and the row for row. The idea though is now we can use this, our user, down here in the value that we're trying to sort of encode into this token. So I would say like user ID, not a hard-coded number 4. Instead it would be our user.id. And why don't we also like store the username in the token? So we could easily say like welcome to your dashboard, Barks a lot, without performing like an extra database lookup necessarily. You don't need to do this. I'm just trying to include a lot of useful data in the token, just as an example. So you could say like username colon our user.username. Cool. Now, before we save this, maybe at the very start of this object we're building, like before sky color, we do need to have a property called exp, which stands for expire. Now, just so we can have a comma, put like the number 1 and then a comma. Cool. Now, we don't actually want the number 1. What you're going to do is give it a number in the future, like how long should this token be considered valid? Now, this is really important because we are not using sessions. This is our only chance from the server side to say essentially when this should no longer be valid. So a common practice is to not let it be valid for very long and then just automatically, or give them like an extra hour or 24 hours every time they visit your app. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's just set it for 24 hours and call it good. So I would say math.floor, parentheses, to call it inside of that, say date now, and still in those parentheses, but we're calling the now function, and then divided by 1,000, because this is going to be measured in milliseconds, and we want seconds. And then before the comma, but after those parentheses, just plus. So how far in the future do we want to go? 60 times 60 times 24. Cool. Let's save this and give it a shot. So back in the browser, let's refresh. Go ahead and delete that cookie. You don't need to, it would get overwritten, but just to be safe, you could delete the cookie. And let's sign up for a new account. So I'll create an account with the name of like Meows a Lot. QWERTY, go ahead and sign up. My apologies. Again, that second cup of coffee is haunting me. We forgot to actually, I knew we were going to forget that. I forgot to use this value down here. So when we're actually setting the cookie, we don't want this hard-coded string. We want our token value. Cool. Let's save that. Give it one more try. So I'll sign up for a user of Kitty Doe. QWERTY. Sign up. It'll give me that new cookie. Beautiful. This is what we want to see. So this value is super long. This is cryptographically secure. There's no way that someone could guess this. And if it is even one character off, like literally if the first E was instead an F, it will fail. So now we can just check this on every incoming request and we can see like, is the user logged in or not? And then we can show them a different home page. We can show them different links in the header depending on whether they're logged in or not. So right now let's learn how to essentially validate or try to verify that token value on the back end. And I think this is the epitome of the perfect use for middleware, because checking that incoming cookie is something we want to do basically universally for all incoming requests in our app. So here's what I would do. Up towards the top of server.js, let's see, I'm looking for our middleware. Yes, so for me it's around line 31, but remember where we said response.locals.errors and we had request response and next. Well, just before we call next, I mean, it doesn't matter if you do it before or after this errors line, but I would just say, like you could write a comment to yourself, try to decode incoming cookie. And then I would just have a try block with a catch block. The catch block should have, room for an error, curly brackets. Cool. Now, here's what we're going to try. Let's say const decode. I'm just making this up. This could be anything. Just make up a variable name. So let's say decoded. And then we're going to use the JWT variable, and it has a method of verify. You give it two things. The first thing you give it is that super long token value that you're trying to see, like, is this legitimate? Is this secure? Or is this a fake malicious value? So let's try to get access to that with request.cookies, and we named it what? Our simple app. Now, I actually can't remember if this is built into Express or if this will run into an error because we need to go grab it from NPM, but we'll find out soon enough. Let's find that out together. Let's go on a little bit of a adventure here. Now, the second argument, the B placeholder, this is your secret. So we know that we can access that with process.env.jwt secret. Cool. Now, if this succeeds, we are safe to say, let's just add an object onto the request object. I'm calling it user. You could call it anything, but I think this is aptly named, and that would just be the decoded value. It's going to be an object, right, with like sky color equals blue, username equals blank, user ID equals blank, all that useful, super useful data. However, if this fails, so if it is not a legitimate real token that we created, it's going to turn into an error, and then this won't even continue. It's just going to halt any further execution. This will run the catch block, In that case, I'm just going to say request.user should equal false. But now the idea is that anywhere else in our app, in any routes, we can just access request.user. And let's actually make our lives a little bit easier. Before next, so right about here, let's say response.locals.user equals request.user. This way we can also access it from any EJS template. Cool. And then just for a quick test, why don't you even say like console.log request.user. Let's save this, open up your console, and let's pay attention to this area. So if you simply refresh, now I'm in a browser where I do have a real valid token, right? I should be logged in as the kitty doe user. If I click refresh on the home page and check my console, we see false. So that means this code failed, and I'm going to assume that answered my own question. This is actually not a built-in part of Express. We do need to go install an npm package in order to be able to access cookies. So that's simple enough. Open up your terminal. In this area where we can install packages, let's say npm install. The name of the package I want is cookie-parser. Go ahead and press enter. Okay, now let's use that up at the top here, the very top of our server.js file. Maybe like a below bcrypt, we'll say const cookie parser equals, and then just require in quotes cookie-parser. All right, and now we do need to go use this cookie parser. So let's look for the line of code. For me, it's around line 30. Maybe just right after where we're creating that public folder, but before any of our routes or middleware, we can just say app.use and then just call cookie parser, parentheses to call it, just like this. Let's give this a save, and now if you refresh the home page as the valid logged in user and check your command line over here, beautiful. There is that token. So I'm logged in as the kitty doe user, sky color blue. This is when it's going to expire. My user ID is 6. That should match, right? Like if we go refresh the database, yep, absolutely. Kitty doe has an ID of 6. So I'm logged in Chrome, but if I visit this same app like in Firefox where I'm not logged in, so I just loaded the page in Firefox here, we should see false in the terminal. Excellent. So now, wherever we are in our app, whether we're in our route handler, whether we're in an EJS template, we can access that. So now, our new goal is to show this screen if you're a guest, if you're not logged in, but let's show like a user dashboard if you are logged in, and then let's also show different actions up in the header depending on whether you're logged in or not. Let's actually start with the conditional header content first. So here's what I would do. Let's jump into our homepage.ejs template and focus on this area, the header element. And I would just do this inside the nav element. So right about here, let's go into EJS. So less than %. And then let's not even worry about the closing EJS tag yet. Let's just have an if statement. So if parentheses, curly brackets. Now at the end of this line, we can exit EJS. At the start of this line, go back into EJS, and then you guessed it, close out of EJS. Now, the if condition would just be if user evaluates to true. If they're not logged in, if it's not a valid JSON Web Token, this will evaluate to false. Let's actually have an else block as well. So in this EJS area, right after that closing curly bracket, I would say else, and then curly brackets, you could drop down again right here, close out of that one, and then before this, open it up. All right, so if the user's logged in, let's have an A element, and let's have a link that goes to, like /create post, and the link text that you click on just says create post, and let's also have a link that logs you out. So log out, and then if you're not logged in, just move the login link to what the guest should see. Let's give that a save, and if I refresh, cool, in this window, I'm logged in, so I see what you would expect. In this window, I'm not logged in, and if I refresh, perfect. So the header is already working. Now let's go ahead and set up, conditional logic. So if you're not logged in, you should see create an account. If you are logged in, you should see like, welcome to your dashboard. Here are all of your posts. To set that up, I'd probably just create a second EJS template. So like in our views folder, we have homepage.ejs. Let's create a new file named like dashboard.ejs for logged in users. So new file in the views folder, call it like dashboard.ejs. For now, let's just duplicate everything inside a homepage, paste it in, and then in the main area, let's just, hollow out the form. Let's have like a heading level 2, that says, welcome to your dashboard. For now, we can just have like, a paragraph with some lorem ipsum. Now, how would we use this template conditionally? Just go into server.js and let's find that route for our home page. So here it is. For me, it's around line 50. And maybe above the response.render line, let's just have an if statement. So I would say like if request.user, if that's true, then just render the dashboard instead. So response.render dashboard. And then here's the important part. Be sure to start that line with the word return. So this way, if this is the case, return will prevent the further execution of this function. But if this is not the case, then we'll just, you guessed it, return the home page. Let's give that a save and test it out. So if I refresh in this window, beautiful. There's my dashboard. If I refresh in Firefox, excellent. There's the sign up form. Now, in a few minutes from now, we can go ahead and worry about actually, setting up the dashboard and the ability to create blog posts or, journal or diary entries. But before we get to that, let's build out both our log out and log in features. Once we can seamlessly, infinitely log in, log out, back and forth, then we can worry about creating, reading, updating, and deleting posts. Since we're already logged in this window, let's first build out the log out feature. Now, normally, anything that would change the state of your application at all should not just be a link that you visit, it should be a form that you submit. However, in this case, even if a malicious user could trick you into clicking this log out address, the worst thing it's going to do is log you out. It's not going to empty your bank account or, create a malicious post on your behalf. So just to keep this as simple as possible, let's just have this, when you click this, it visits /logout. Now let me show you what I would do. Let's just set up a new route for that. It doesn't matter exactly where, maybe below our homepage route. So I'd say if you perform a app get request to /logout, then comma, parentheses, request, response, arrow symbol, curly brackets. Let's just send headers to tell the user's browser to delete that cookie. So response.clear cookie, and we named it our simple app. And then after that, just response redirect. We want to redirect the user back to the homepage / right? Because they could have been on create post or the edit screen for a single post, so on and so forth. So just delete the cookie, redirect it. Let's hit save. Let's test this out. So if you refresh and I click on log out, beautiful. That worked. I mean, that was easy enough. Now let's set it up so that when you click on log in, we already have the login page, but let's actually bring this to life. So this should now be a form that you can type into and submit. Actually, really quick, before we build out that form, let's first address the question of how are we going to avoid duplicating our header code across, our 3 or 4 or 5 different templates. Let me close all these files and explain what I'm getting at here. So now we have dashboard, we have homepage, we have login, and we have duplicated this header code across all of them. We probably don't want to repeat ourselves like that. Now, EJS does not have a super convenient or easy layout file feature where you can just define your layout once and then sort of render in the middle part. I mean, if you get creative, you can set up something very similar to that. But in order to keep things as simple as possible, I'm just going to use the old traditional includes approach. Let me show you what I have in mind here. In the views folder, let's create a subfolder and call it includes. And then in that folder, let's create a few files. So let's create one new file named header.ejs. Let's create another new file named head. That'll be the head section of the HTML document, .ejs. And then finally, let's have one called footer.ejs. So let's use our home page as the copy paste area. It has the most recent code, right? That's, if you're logged in, if you're not logged in. So I would literally just take the entire semantic header element from here to here, cut that into my clipboard, and then in the new includes header.ejs, paste it in, save it, go back into the home page, and now in its place, here's what we'll do. Just opening EJS tag, but now instead of $, we're going to say dash. Remember, $, will escape the content, but this is our own, HTML that you and I are writing, so we trust it, so we don't want to escape it. We want it to actually render as HTML, right? So this would normally be super dangerous if this was user-generated HTML, but it's, you and I generated HTML. So a dash to not escape it, and then just call include, parentheses, and we, the quotes, the path is look inside the includes folder for header, and then exit closing EJS tag right here. Cool. Let's do the same thing for our footer. So just scroll down. It's only 3 lines of code, but you get the idea. Just cut the footer into your clipboard, go into footer.ejs, paste it in, hit save. In its place to save some typing back in homepage, I would just borrow this include code and then just paste it down here. All you need to do is change this to footer. And then let's do the same thing for the head section. So up in the head document, I would just have this entire head block, cut that into my clipboard, go into head.ejs, not header, paste it in, back in homepage, just duplicate this include line right here, call it head. So now you can save that, and your homepage, if you go back to the homepage, it still works perfectly. So now let's just do the same thing we can close the includes folder. Let's do the same thing in dashboard and log in. So I would just close all of my files other than homepage and dashboard, and I would just go into homepage. I would grab this include. It's probably actually faster to just paste it in and then change the typing, but let's just hollow out the head area, paste that in, hollow out the header, and paste it, change the name to header, get rid of the footer, paste it in, change this to footer, and then just one last time, I promise, and then the repetitive stuff will be over. Let's go into login.ejs, replace the head with head, replace the header with header, and replace the footer with footer. Cool. So now we're back in business and we don't have duplicated code all over the place. Now let's get back to the task at hand. If you visit the login screen, let's actually have this be a form where you type in username and password, so on and so forth. Now, in order to save a lot of typing there, I would just borrow the homepage form code, right? So inside of homepage.ejs, we have this field set. We actually already have a form. I would just take the entire main area. So from the starting main tag to the closing main tag, just copy that into your clipboard and login.ejs. Just replace the main area. Okay, and then for the form action, this should now be, instead of /register, it should be /login. And yes, we're still performing a post request. Yep, show the errors if there are any. Really all we would need to change is instead of saying sign up, let's have this button down here say like log in. And then also the legend first inside the field set, instead of create an account, let's have this say like just the intuitive text of login. Let's go ahead and save that. So now if you refresh to login, beautiful. So before we even try to fill this in and submit it, what we need to do is go into server.ejs and receive that when you perform that post request. So it doesn't matter exactly where, maybe like above the register route, I would just say app.post. A comma B. The first thing is the URL pattern, so that's /login, and the B placeholder, this is just request response, arrow symbol, curly brackets. And I would probably begin by actually just reusing some of the code from register. Like, yes, I do indeed want to create the errors array, and I want to make sure these values are strings. So I would just copy those 3 lines, paste it in here. Now, before we bother, the first thing we're going to want to do is like look up the attempted username in the database and like, is that a document or not? But before we even waste a trip talking to SQLite, let's first make sure that the username and password are not empty. Like if they're empty, we don't even need to waste talking to the database. So I would say like if request.body.username, let's call trim too. So no spaces at the beginning or end. If that double equal sign's just empty, then let's push on an error message. So errors.push, and let's just say invalid username /password. And I would just do the same thing for their password too. On password, I wouldn't call trim, but just get rid of the .trim. But just, yes, if you don't have change this to password. If you don't even supply a password, we're not even going to waste talking to the database. So then on the next line, I'd probably say like if errors.length, like if there are any errors, then I would just return response.render, the login page, and just comma, pass along an object with errors. Cool. And then assuming they do supply that, we can test this out. We can say like response.send and just say thank you. So you can save that. If I try to log in with nothing, cool. Well, for extra credit, you could set it up so we don't display the exact same thing twice. But again, that can be extra credit. That's not really a foundational concept of what we're learning here at hand. right? But if I supply values, then we see thank you. So let's go back and let's keep building this out. So this code down here is only going to run if there aren't any errors. So now I would just try to look up that username in the database. And then we're going to compare to see if the password is a match or not. So the first thing is to just find the user in question. So I'd probably say like const, let's say like user in question statement equals db prepare. And this is just going to be select asterisk, like select all from the users table where username equals question mark. And then on the next line, we can fill in that value, the question mark. So on the next line, I'll say like const user in question equals, and then just user in question statement dot get. And then back to the question mark. The question is which username? Well, just request.body.username, right? The value that's coming from our form. So now, if this is not found, like if this doesn't evaluate to true, so if exclamation result, like if that's not a match, that means there's no one even in the database with that username. I would just want to push on an error. But you know what? I really don't want like 2 or 3 flash messages. So I know I said that was extra credit, but let me think of a more elegant solution like on the fly here. I'd probably change this instead of being const errors. Let's just say like let errors equals an empty array. And then instead of pushing, I'd probably just say like errors equals an array where that's, so square brackets, where that's the only message. And then I would just do that here too, like overwrite it so that errors equals. What I'm doing here is this is the only message that would ever apply for a login form. I don't even want to give a malicious user a hint as to whether that username exists or not, or like whether I don't want to give them any extra information. So this is all I'm willing to give. Anyways, if that's not even found in the database, then just the same thing. I would say like errors now equals an array, which is quotes invalid username / password. Whoops, and we definitely don't need parentheses around these quotes up here. So just basically just write an array where the only thing in it is one string of text. Let's get rid of that. Opening and closing. Cool. All right, now down here, if this is the case, I'm going to be sure to include the word return here. I want to prevent the further execution of this function because I don't even want to waste a bcrypt hash comparison if there is no matching document in the database. My apologies. Let's not return errors. Let's return response.render login and then just an object with errors. Now below this, we can actually waste the CPU operation of performing that comparison. So I would just say like const, and you could name it anything, but let's call it like match or not equals, and then we're going to use bcrypt. Let's spell that correctly. Bcrypt. It has a method called compare sync. You give it 2 things, right? The 2 things that you're trying to compare. So the first value is request.body.password, the attempted login value. The second argument is the real password. So we have user in question, so that would just be user in question. This is the real value in the database, dot password. Now below that line, we can just do something different depending on whether this will either equal true or false. So I would say like if, parentheses, curly brackets, if that's false, if match or not is false, you could just borrow these lines of code, right? Just paste that in. But then down here, this will only run if it's actually a match. So if it's actually a match, what do we want to do? We want to give them a cookie and redirect them back to the home page. So I could even write a comment here like give them a cookie and redirect. Now let's just go borrow the cookie code that we've already written. So if you press Control or Command F and search for jwt.sign, right, this area, we don't need to spell this out again. We can just reuse it. So I would select this entire R token value and then even this entire cookie code. And actually, before we copy and paste this, let's just change this. Instead of response.send, this is back, remember when we were registering a user, this should be response.redirect back to the home page. And now we can just borrow all of this code. So from the our token, the response.cookie, and the redirect, I would just copy all of that into my clipboard and then go find our login function. So right where we just said match or not, we don't need these comments anymore. I would just paste in your clipboard instead. And now we do need to adjust the token value just a little bit. We just need to change where the user ID and username values are coming from. So they're, in this context, instead of our user.id, this would be userinquestion.id. And this, for the username, this would be, right, userinquestion.username. Cool, but other than that, everything should be perfect. Let's go ahead and save this and see if we run into any errors or if it works as expected. So if I refresh, and I try to log into my Kitty Doe account. Well, actually, let me get the wrong password on purpose. Result is not defined. I don't even remember using the word result. What if we search for the word result? So we used the word result in our register function. But if you scroll up a little bit just in our login function, this should not be exclamation result. This should be exclamation user in question. Right, so this was the block of code right before the match or not. This should be user in question. Let's save that, and let me try to log in with an incorrect password again. So Kitty Doe with a bogus password. Perfect. We see the failed message. Now let me try to log in successfully. So Kitty Doe, QWERTY. Beautiful. I can log out. Beautiful. Let me try to create a brand new account with like Fluffy. Nice. I can log out. Let me log back in as Kitty Doe. Now, let's just add one more quick feature to our user registration before and I promise this will be the last feature, and then we can start building out our blog post or journal entry feature. I want to make sure that when you're creating an account, we don't let someone choose a username that's already taken or already exists in the database. Now, I realize we have that constraint already hard-coded in our database, right? Like if you go up to the very top of our file, we're saying that username must be unique, but I don't want the user to see like a SQLite error message. I want them to see just, like our little flash message right here. So here's what I would do. Let's find our register post handler in server.js. So if I control F for /register, let's find our different validation rules. And here are the username rules. Here are the password rules. So right before the end of the username rules, I would just say like, check if username exists already. And then I would just say like const username statement equals db prepare, and select asterisk from the users table where username equals question mark, and then just use that. So let's say like const username check equals, and then it's just username statement dot get, and to fill in the question mark, it's request dot body dot username. Now, if this evaluates to true, that means we have a problem. That means that username already exists. So I would say if username check, if that's true, then just errors dot push that username is already taken. Let's give this a save and test it out. So if I try to create an account with Kitty Doe, that's already taken. All right, this is exactly what I was trying to avoid. So this is the not user-friendly SQLite message that I didn't want users to see. Let's see what went wrong here. Clearly I have a little bit of a typo here. Yes, there should not be quotes. So when we're calling user statement.get, there should absolutely not be quotes around that. That is a real JavaScript expression and variable instead. So no quotes. Save that, go back. Again, let me click sign up. Beautiful. That username is already taken. Cool. Let me go to login. Let me get logged in here. And now let's start building out the post functionality, blog posts or a journal entry or whatever. We want to be able to create, read, update, and delete posts. Let's start with this create post link. So when you click that, it takes you to /create post. You receive an error, so let's just go set up that route in a new EJS template. So inside our server.js, it doesn't matter exactly where, but just down here with the routes, as long as it comes after any and all middleware that we're spelling out in any of those app.use statements. So down here, we can just say like app.get. When you send a GET request to /create-post, comma, request, response, arrow symbol, curly brackets. Let's just say response.render, and we can call it create-post. Let's go create that view now. So in the views folder, new file, name it create-post.ejs. Now we can save a lot of typing by just borrowing the code from our login file. So I would just take everything inside of login and just paste it in our new create post file. And then let's just start changing the form action. So instead of /login, this could be a post request to /create post. Let's change the legend to say create a new post. Let's change the username field to be the title of your post. So I'd probably just select this instance of username, press Control or Command D a few more times to select all of these and just change it to title. And then this instance inside of small, this I'd probably make an uppercase title. And then I would just change password to be a text area. I'd probably just delete this password input altogether. And instead, well, first of all, we can change the label. So this can be like, let's call it like body, short for body content. And then this can say content. And then down here, I would just create a text area, hit tab. It would have a name of body, an ID of body. Okay, and then the submit button doesn't need to say log in. Let's have it say like save new post or create new post, something along those lines. Let's go ahead and save that. And now if you visit this path, cool. So now let's just go set up the route for when you send a post request, like when you submit this form. So back in server.js, right below this, we could just say app.post, not get, but when you send a post request to /create post, comma, just have a function, request, response, arrow symbol, curly brackets. Let's start by just saying console.log request.body, and then just say response.send thank you. So let's open up our terminal. We're focusing on this area, and now if I submit this form, so my amazing title, wonderful content, and submit, we see thank you, but more importantly, we can receive that on the server side. So now let's just set up the actual logic to make sure that the current user is logged in. If they are logged in, we can go ahead and validate the incoming title and body, clean it up, sanitize it, and then save it into our database. Let's start by making sure you're logged in, and not only for just a post request, but you shouldn't even be able to view the form for creating a post if you're not logged in. So what I would do, maybe just right above this line, is create a reusable function that is a piece of middleware. So we've already created an example of middleware up towards the top of this file, but that was sort of a universal or global middleware that's going to run for every request. Now I want to show you an example where you can spell out a piece of middleware and then only use it for the specific routes that you want to list it on. Let me show you what I have in mind here. Let's create a function, and you could name it anything, but I'm going to call it must be logged in. I think it's aptly named. In the parentheses, let's give it request, response, and next. In the body, I'm just going to check for request.user. If that's true, I'm going to return next. And then down here, if this doesn't happen, that means you're not logged in. So then I'm just going to return and then response dot, just kick them back to the home page. So response dot redirect. But now let's use that must be logged in for these two routes. So this is one of my favorite features in Express. It's this easy to add middleware. You just add in as many functions as you want. So the first argument is your URL pattern. And you know how our second argument is a function? Well, you can have your second, your third, your fourth, your fifth through 100 all be functions that run one after another. So essentially, just after this URL pattern, we can just say must be logged in, comma. So it's going to run this function, then it's going to run this function. You could have a comma here and spell out another function, but you get the idea. So this is the true power and composability of middleware. So then on this one, we could also say must be logged in, comma. Cool. So in this browser where I am logged in, I can view this. I can also submit the form. But if I go over to Firefox, where I am not logged in, and I try to visit, /create post. So if I press enter in the URL bar, awesome. It just kicks me right back to the home page. So now we have that really nice reusable piece of middleware. Awesome. Now let's get back to the task at hand. Inside of this function, create post, we don't need to log it to the console. And we can even get rid of response.send. Let's start fresh. So the first thing we want to do is start validating or cleaning up the title and body fields. We want to check for any validation errors, right? Well, let's have a little foresight and realize that the logic for cleaning up a post when you're creating it is going to be basically identical to when you are editing an existing post. So right away, I'm going to try to split out my validation into a separate function that we can also use when we're updating a post. So instead of just saying like const errors equals an empty array, I'm actually going to say const errors equals, and then let's go create this function in 5 seconds from now. So let's imagine we're calling a function. We could call it anything, but maybe like shared post validation, parentheses to call it, and then just give it the request object. Okay, now above this function, so outside of this route handler, just in the root of our file, let's create a function with that name. So shared post validation, parentheses, curly brackets. Absolutely make sure that you have a parameter to receive that incoming request that we're passing into it. And now in this function, I would just say, const errors equals an empty array, and then we can have a bunch of useful checks, but then at the very end of this function, we're going to return errors, right? So then that's what this would equal. But this way we've split it out into a reusable function. So in between these lines right here, now we can just start spelling out our rules. I'd probably begin by making sure it's a string. So I'd say like if type of request.body.title, if that does not double equal sign string, well, then just set it to an empty string. So request.body.title equals empty quotes. I duplicate that for password, or excuse me, not password, body. This would also be body. All right, next up, I want to trim, but also like sanitize or strip out HTML. In other words, I don't want to let users store any sort of HTML or script tags or anything in my database. Now, I realize it's the front end's job to escape any output from the database, but I like to keep things safe in both directions. I don't let anything malicious into my database in the first place, and I make sure that even if somehow something did get in my database, right, like worst case scenario, also my front end escapes any output. So there's a really nice package. So if we open up our command line, over in this terminal where we can install things, let's say clear, let's say npm install, and the name of the package is sanitize-html. Go ahead and press enter. Now let me show you how we're going to use that. First of all, let's import it or require it up at the top here. So let .env be your first line, but then just anywhere in here we can say const, let's call it like sanitize all uppercase HTML equals require. The name of the package though was exact. It is sanitize-html. Cool. So I'm just basically going to allow nothing. I'm going to strip out everything that isn't just plain text. So no HTML, no JavaScript allowed. So let's just go back to our shared post validation. Yes, right here. Here's what I would do. I would say request.body.title should now equal, and then I'm going to call sanitize all uppercase HTML. That's the variable we made it available from. And then we're going to give that two things. So A, comma B. The first thing you give it is the string that you're trying to clean up. So I would say request.body.title, and I'm going to call trim, just to remove any white space at the start or end. And now the second thing you give it, instead of B, is a configuration object. We're going to give it allow, and this needs to be exact. I'm not making this up. This is what the package needs. An exact property of allowed tags. Set that to an empty array. We don't want to allow any tags, comma, and then a property of allowed attributes. And now this is confusing. You would think it would just be an empty square brackets. This one is actually an empty object. So allowed tags is an empty array, allowed attributes is an empty object, and now we have essentially removed all malicious HTML and JavaScript. It's that easy. So now I would just duplicate that line, paste it in. This would be for body. So request.body, this would be body here. Cool. The only other thing we really need to do is just make sure that the fields aren't empty. So I would say like if request.body.title, you could put an exclamation here to check for the opposite of that. So if this is the case, we have a problem. That means you didn't enter anything. So I would just say errors.push. You must provide a title. I do the same thing for body content. So this would be body. You must provide content. Cool. So we'll return any errors. Otherwise, we have directly mutated and cleaned up and sanitized request.body, or at least these two properties that we care about. So now back down in the post handler for create post, we can just check. We can say like if there are no errors. So after this line, let's say if errors.length, like if there are errors, well, I would just return response.render create post, but also comma an object, give them the errors back to display to them. If this doesn't run, we don't even need an else bracket. Just this would prevent the further execution because of return. So then down here, if there are no errors, let's save it into our database. So we could write a comment to ourselves, save into database. But let's change gears a little bit because we're not ready to save it into the database. We first need to create a new table, right, in our SQLite database called posts. Because right now we only have a table called users. So if you go back to like database structure, right, we need to create a new table here. So we can do that just up at the very top of this server.js file. Luckily for us, that's why I used DB transaction up here. It's so you can run multiple statements. So check this out. Inside of this overall function here, but below this .run line, so right here where my cursor is right now, let's just spell out the post table. So I would just say db.prepare. Inside of there, I would have backticks. You can drop down. Before we even fill that out, after the closing parentheses, we know that we're going to call run. And now in the backticks, we can just say create table if not exists. It's going to be called posts. Parentheses, you can drop down inside the parentheses. Let's say the first one should be ID, which is an integer. It is the primary key, and we want to auto increment, comma. Let's have a created on date. So created date. That can just be text, comma. Let's have the title of the blog post. Let me scroll down a little bit here. So title, which will be a string, and you cannot leave it empty, comma. Let's say body, which is text, and you cannot leave it empty, comma. And now here's a really important one. We want to keep track of which user ID created this post, like who is the author of this post. So I'm going to call it author ID, all lowercase. It's up to you, but this is just so you and I are on the same page, all lowercase, author ID, and that's going to be an integer, comma. And now to improve the speed and performance of looking things up by author ID, we're going to create a key. So we're going to say foreign key, parentheses, author ID, references the users table, parentheses, ID. So we're just spelling out to the database that, hey, this value references this value. By spelling out this relationship, SQLite can perform those lookups much faster. Cool. So the next time we save this file, it's going to modify our database. We can try that right now. If you click save and then go back into DB browser for SQLite, and let's see, where's the refresh button? Right here. So if we click refresh, nice. Now there's a table called posts. If you click on that, right click, click browse table. Awesome. This is just what we wanted to see. So now we're ready to go back down into our post handler. We called it what? Create post. This one, for me, it's around line 150, app.post create post. We have this comment, save into database, and let's just start spelling it out. So let's say like const our statement equals db, call the prepare method. And sometimes it actually helps me to work backwards. So like before we spell out this query on the next line, let's say like const result equals, and then we know that we're going to run that. So like our statement dot run. And then sometimes it even helps me to, in terms of working backwards, to just give it what I know I'm going to need to provide. So like I know that I'm going to need to provide request.body.title, comma, request.body.body, comma, request.user.user ID. This is coming from the decoded JSON Web Token. And we know that you will only ever get here if you are logged in because of that middleware. And then we're not done here. Let's give it comma, one more thing. We need to give it the created on date. I'm not a SQLite expert. There might be a way to have SQLite generate a date on the fly, but we can just use Express or JavaScript here. So I would just say like a new instance of date and then tack on .to ISO string parentheses to call that. So ISO is all capital, and then the S for string is capital. Okay, so now that we've given it everything that we know we would need to give it, let's actually write the SQL statement here. So inside of prepare, just quotes, and then we're going to say insert into the posts table, and then a pair of parentheses, and then say values, and then another pair of parentheses, and let's again just work backwards. So we know, what are there? 4 things, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I would just have 4 question marks after values, right? We're working backwards sort of. And then this is where you spell out the column names. So title, comma, body, comma, all lowercase, author, you really need to spell it correctly, author ID, comma, created date. If yours doesn't work, just make sure that you are consistent. So I did capitalize the D in date. So up at the top of this file, when you were spelling out the structure for your database, right? You can see there's my D that's capital. Anyways, you don't need to match mine, but you do need to be consistent. Cool. And then at the very end of this, so below that line, we would want to redirect them somewhere, right? Because if you're submitting that from this URL of /create post, we wouldn't want to keep them on that URL. I'd probably want to either redirect them back to their homepage, or better yet, I'd want to redirect them to the new URL where you can view that newly created post. So for example, let's do this. Let's have a URL pattern that's like /post/ and then the ID number for that individual post, right? So like /post/1, /post/2. Now, I don't want to reference the row ID. I want to reference our ID column that we spelled out. So here's what I'd probably do. I'd say like const get post statement equals db and call prepare. And this would be select all from posts where row ID equals question mark. And then I would just say const like real post, the actual post. You could call it anything, but we'll just say get post statement dot get, not run, but get. We want to retrieve a document from the database. And this would be result dot last insert uppercase row, but then all lowercase row ID. Okay, now check this out. Finally, what we're going to do is just say response dot redirect. Actually, instead of quotes, let's use backticks. And here's the format I'm thinking of, like /post/ and then just, a number. So 1, 2, 3, a billion. Whatever the unique ID for the post is. So then to do something dynamic, $ curly brackets. In this, we named it real post. Just look inside it so dot ID. Now, currently, we haven't set up that URL pattern or a EJS template. So we're going to get an error. But then, in 5 seconds from now, we can set that up. So let's save this and test it out. So we just need to test it out. We're just going to create a new post. Let's say like my first post. This is a quick test. Go ahead and click Save New Post. Cool. So that's the exact URL pattern I wanted. Obviously, we haven't spelled out that route or template yet. But if you go to your DB browser and click the refresh icon for your post table, beautiful. So you can expand this, but there's our title, there's our content, there's author ID. Kitty Doe has an ID of 6. Created date, we are in business. So now, let's just set two things up. Let's set up this URL pattern for when you visit an individual post. And then let's also set up things so that on your homepage, when you're logged in, it shows you a list of all of your posts. So in other words, only the posts where author ID matches your logged in ID. So let me just create another post really quick. I'll say like my second post. This is a magical test. Go ahead and save that just to get me back to this URL pattern. Cool. So let me show you how I would set this up. Let's go back into server.js. And just below or above another URL route pattern, we're going to say app.get. When you perform a GET request to /post/, but now we're not going to hard code a number here. Instead, after the slash, you can say :ID. This will make it a dynamic variable, essentially, that we can use in our route handler. So let's say comma, and then you know the drill. It's just request response, arrow symbol, curly brackets. Let's say const statement equals db.prepare. We know that we're going to call get on that, so I'd say like const post equals statement.get. What are we going to give it? The unique ID for the post in question that's coming from the URL pattern. So to get something from the URL, it's request.params. And we named it ID, right? We said :ID. Cool, now let's just write the SQL statement. So this would be quotes, select, select everything from the post table where ID equals question mark. Now, here's what I would do. If that post doesn't exist, let's just kick them back to the home page. So I would say like if exclamation post, if it evaluates to false, just return response dot redirect back home. Otherwise, that means that post exists. Let's just say response dot render, and we can create an EJS template in like 5 seconds from now called maybe like single dash post. Comma, we want to give it something, so an object, and let's just give it post. Now you could say post : and then that's the value, but in modern JavaScript, if your variable name or a property name is the exact same as the expression of where the value is coming from, like if it's just a match, you don't need to say post, you can just say post. Let's give that a save, and now let's go create that view file. So in the views folder, new file, let's name it what? single-post.ejs. In that new file, I'll just copy everything from login just to save some typing, some boilerplate, right? That's going to at least get us the header and footer. Let's delete that entire form in the main area so we just have an empty main sandwich. And let's just start with like heading level 1, and let's just start with the title. So post.title. And again, to echo or output or to render something, it's the EJS, but equal sign. Equal sign is how you make sure that even if there was malicious code coming from the database, the equal sign like this escapes it, so it's not rendered as actual HTML. So this is super safe. Let's fill in the content and all that later, but first let's just see if this is working. So if we save that and refresh, awesome. There's my title. So now let's output like a little bit of text that says like posted on, and then the date that it was posted by, and then the author's username. And then let's have the body content below that. So back in our single post template, below the heading level 1, but still inside the main tag, let's have an article tag. And then inside of that, let's have a small element, and this can be the text that says like posted by, and for now, let's just hard code it to username. In a few minutes from now, we can make this the real dynamic author name. We'll circle back to that. Let's say on, and then this would be a date. For now, let's just put date, and then we'll make that dynamic in just a moment. And then below the small, but still inside the article, I would just have a div, and then in that div, output the body content. So opening tag, equal sign, and this would just be post.body. Close that out. Let's give that a save, refresh. Cool. Now, the question becomes, how in the world are we going to get the username? Let me explain why this is a bit trickier than you might think. If we look at our database, a post row in the database absolutely does not have the username. It just has their author ID. So we need to somehow take this ID, like in this case, let me refresh. Whichever post it was, I think it was this one. We need to find the username based on this user ID value of 6. In other words, we need to like go into the users table and find this row where ID is 6. And we're looking for this, right? Kitty Doe, or whatever the dynamic username in question is. So we just need to write a little bit of a different SQL statement. So if you go back into server, currently we have select everything from the post table where ID equals blank. And what we need to do is right before the word where, or right after the word posts, we need to say inner join. Let me hide my sidebar to make a bit more space here. Inner join the users table on the following condition. Right? It's where posts.author ID equals the users table ID column. So what that's going to do is when we look up, so for example, like let's say we find this post, we're basically asking to join it together, like glue on the other row from the users table where there's a match here, and then all of it can get retrieved. However, we don't necessarily need to retrieve everything if we don't need everything. So then you can spell out exactly the columns you need. So we could say like, instead of asterisk, you could say like select posts.asterisk, like everything from the post table, comma, but then on the users table, all we need is username. So select just this from the post table, join them on this condition, and then this at the very end is still the post we're looking for. Let's save that, see if we have any syntax errors. Yes, we absolutely do. So at the very end of that line, this is not specific enough anymore, right? So it doesn't know which table we're referring to. So we would need to say posts.id. Let's save that, refresh. Okay, beautiful. So now let's go make this dynamic. All we would need to do is in our template, instead of username, this would be EJS output post.username. So that's just going to be on that object now. Beautiful. Now let's make the date actually dynamic. So let's find that bit of text right here. Instead of date, let's start with the month. So EJS, and close out of EJS. So it's going to be a new instance of date, so parentheses to call it, but not empty parentheses. We're going to pass it post.createdDate. Now that's not a string of text for just the month. That's going to be an object that represents the date. So then at the end of that, we're going to call a method of getMonth. Now months in JavaScript are 0 based. So like January is going to be 0 instead of 1. So we just want a +1, not exclamation, +1. Right? So like December is going to be 11 +1 to make it 12. Okay, now here's where it gets a little bit confusing, or the typing looks messy. I'm going to put a slash because I want it to say like the month, and then a slash, and then the day, and then a slash, and then the year. So right here, we can just output the day. So go into EJS, just do the exact same thing. A new instance of date, give it post.createdDate, and then we're going to call getDate. And then after that EJS, let's say slash, and now I want the year. So go into EJS, new instance of date, give it post.createdDate, and then call the method of getFullYear. Let's save this, refresh. Beautiful. In a few minutes from now, let's add edit and delete icons so that you can update and delete an existing post from this single view post screen. But for now, what I want to work on right now is from your home page. Your dashboard should just have a list, and you can click through all of your existing posts to view them. Right? Because currently the only way we have to visit that URL that we were just at is it redirects you here after you create a new post. But let's go to our home page and just build out a list of your posts. So this is really simple. We're just going to go into server.js, and let's look for our home route. So if you search for like app.get, yes, this very first one, just the homepage route. If you're logged in, we're giving them the dashboard. So we just want to pass along a little bit of data with this. So absolutely inside that if statement, but before the return, I would just say like const, maybe like posts statement equals db prepare. And the SQL statement would be select everything. So select asterisk from the post table where author ID equals question mark. Okay, then on the next line, we just say like const posts equals, and then we're going to use posts statement. Now, previously we've seen .run, we've seen .get. We're going to use .all. This is very similar to get, except this will return multiple results. So an array instead of just a single object. And then to fill in the question mark here, which author ID, we can just say request.user.id. Then we can just pass posts into our template. So after dashboard, quotes, say comma, give it an object, and just give it posts. So now we can save that. Let's see, we shouldn't run into any errors. Perfect. And now we just go use that in our dashboard file. So in dashboard.ejs, let's leave this heading level 2. We can circle back to that in just a moment, but we can get rid of the paragraph, and let's just output a list. So I would start with an unordered list element. Then inside there, I want to loop through an array. So I would, EJS symbol like this. No equal sign because I'm not trying to output or escape anything. I'm just trying to go into dynamic JavaScript mode. And I'm going to take the posts array and use its for each method. Then let's give it an arrow function. If you have exactly one parameter, you don't even need the parentheses around your parameters. So we can say like post, arrow symbol, curly brackets. In between the curly brackets, you can drop down. And now at the end of that line, we can close out of EJS at the start of this line, open it up, And then right here we can have traditional HTML. So let's have a list item. In the list item, we're going to have a link. So you can just hit A and then tab. The link is going to be /post/ and then some sort of number here, right? Well, we don't want to hard code it, so just EJS, and it's just post.id. Now, the text inside the A sandwich that you actually click on, that would just be output in EJS, post.title. And why don't we go a step further? Let's say on and then the date. So after the A closing tag, I'd say on, but still inside the list item. And then I don't want to spell out that date, that big messy date text again. So I just go back into single post and just start selecting from here forward, right? So from there to there, just copy that and just paste it in right there. Let's give that a save. And if I refresh my home page, whoops, clearly that query is returning nothing. Let's go take a look. Select all from posts where, so there's nothing wrong with this. There's got to be something wrong with this. Oh, that's right. Remember we stored like username in the JSON Web Token? We named it user ID, not just ID. So instead of .id, .user ID. Let's go ahead and save that, refresh. Perfect. I can click on one, and go back to my home page and click on the other one. Great. Now let's go ahead and add like an edit button here and a delete button here. So to set that up, we would just go into our singlepost.ejs file, and still inside the main element, but below the article element. So right about here, I would just have, an A element, have a hashtag for just 10 seconds as a placeholder. So the text would say edit post, and just for a little bit of styling, we could give it a class of button. And then for the href, it would just be / and I'm just making this up, but how about like edit -post / and then like the number for the ID. Only it wouldn't be a hard-coded number. We would use EJS to output, and then it would just be post.id. Right below that, I would have a form for the delete action. So I'd say form, let's have the action be, /delete post / and then instead of a hard-coded number, just output something in EJS. Again, it would just be post.id. The method should be post. And I want this form to sit side by side with the edit button, so I would just tell the opening tag to say style display inline. Okay, then inside the form, just have a button that says delete post. Essentially, it's just a good practice that anytime you're actually changing the state or data of your application, it probably shouldn't just be initiated by a GET request. It should most likely be a POST request. All right, so if we save that and check it out, refresh, cool. Now in 5 minutes from now, we can set it up so that you only see these buttons if you are indeed the author of this specific post. But before we get to that, let's just make these buttons come to life. Let's start with the edit post. So when you click on that, we just need to set up the URL pattern for, /edit post / and then the ID. So let's go into server.js. I'd probably just search for single post. Yes, so this route, maybe like right above or below that route, I would say app.get /edit -post / and then it's :ID. Let's give it request response. And I'm just going to write a few comments to myself. So first of all, I'd probably try to look up the post in question. And then if you're not the author, I'd probably just kick you back to the home page. So if you are not the author, redirect to home page. And then, otherwise, render the edit post template. Cool, so let's just start with step 1. Let's look that up in the database. So it would be like const statement equals db prepare, and just select all from the posts table where id equals $, and then just actually use that. So I would say const post in question, or you know what, we could just call it post equals statement.get, and it would just be request.params.id. And then I would say if, and then I'm going to check if post.author ID does not equal request.user.user ID. So if that's the case, I would just want to return a redirect back to the home page. Otherwise, I would want to response.render, and then let's call it like edit post. We can create that EJS file in a minute from now, and then just give it some data. So an object, and let's say post. And again, you don't need to spell it out if it's a perfect match. So just post. Let's give this a save and test it out. So if I refresh in this window, of course, we need to go create that EJS template. So in our views folder, I would create a new file, name it edit post.ejs. And it's going to be almost identical to create post. So I would just copy everything in there, back in edit post, paste it in. Let's change the legend to, edit existing post. And then you would just give these initial values. So like for the title, I would say value equals, but instead of typing something in here, it would just be EJS, escape and output, post.title. Then do the same thing down here. You could give this a value, but I'd probably just include it in the text area sandwich. So post.body. And then change the button. So instead of save new post, you could say like save changes. Let's save that and refresh. Cool, so this is working, but it looks like I have an error in my HTML closing tag somewhere. Yep, so the closing tag for legend. Cool. So I can view this in this browser, but if I try to view this in Firefox where I am not logged in, so as soon as I press enter on that URL, whoops, redirect is not defined. So back in server, yes, not just redirect. I'm used to using Next.js. This would be response.redirect. So save that, back in Firefox. If I refresh, cool, it just kicks me right back to the home page. Cool, but back in this window where I am logged in, now let's focus on actually submitting this data and actually updating the appropriate item in the database. Actually, before we get to that, one really quick detail. What if you try to visit this edit post URL for an ID that doesn't exist? So like if I try to visit an ID of 12345, we don't want this error screen. If the post doesn't exist in the database, just kick the person back to the home page. So here's what I would do. Before we check to see if you're the author or not, I would just have another if check where I say if post is false, like so exclamation post. If it doesn't exist, then just return, redirect back to home. So now if I refresh, whoops, those Next.js habits die hard. So again, that's response.redirect. Cool. Now back to the task at hand. If we try to edit this post, let's work on actually receiving these updates, validating the inputs, and saving the changes into the database. What I would do is just right below this route, I would just set up a new route, say app.post. Let me scroll up a little bit. When you send a post request to /edit post /ID, and then request response arrow function. And then we can borrow some of the code that we just wrote. So we can borrow this, try to look up the post in question. If it doesn't exist, redirect. If you're, and especially if you're not the author, redirect. So we can copy all of that and then just start the function by pasting that in. Cool, but then the question is, if there are no problems, what do we want to do? Well, I want to reuse that validation logic from create post. So we can just say const errors equals, and we named it shared post validation. And remember, you give it the request object. And then just depending on if there are errors or not, we want to do something different. So I would say like if errors.length. If there are errors, let's just return and then response.render. And then just the edit post template again, but give them a bit of data. So just give them errors. Below this, if there are no errors, let's actually update the database. So I'd say like const update statement equals db prepare. And I'm going to work backwards here. So on the next line, I would say like const, and actually we don't need anything from what it returns, so you don't even need to save it to a variable. You could just say update statement dot run. We don't need to get anything back. We just want to execute the statement. And the question is like, what do we need to give it? So we need to give it request.body.title. We need to give it request.body.body. And I believe that's it. because you don't need to give it the author ID or the date because those already exist. So really, we're just setting or updating these two values. So then for the prepare statement, let's say, quotes, update something in the post table, and we're going to set the title to equal question mark, comma, the body to equal question mark, and then where, do this on the post, where ID equals, and then this would be question mark, but then down here, we don't need to give anything from request.body. This would be, the third argument would be request.params.id. Cool. And then below this line, like once that finishes, let's just redirect them to the single URL for that post. So I would just say like response.redirect. Instead of quotes, let's do backticks, and it's going to be /post/ and then a number, but for something dynamic, $ curly brackets, and this would just be what, request.params.id. Let's save this and give it a try. So if I refresh and I maybe add like 3 exclamations to the title and like 3 exclamations to the body content, click Save Changes. Awesome, we see those changes persisted and it automatically redirected me to a URL that makes sense. I could click Edit again. I could remove those from the title and say, amazing. You get the idea. Now let's try to bring this delete button to life. Let's begin by paying attention to where this form submits to. So if we go into single post, that form is /delete post and then the ID. So I would just go into server.js, just set up a brand new route for when you send so app post request to /delete post / and then :ID, and then just request response arrow function. Now I would say that the start of this function can be almost identical to when you are editing a post. Like let's try to look up the post in question if it doesn't exist, and if you're not the author, perfect. So just copy that into your clipboard. Let's just reuse and borrow that for our delete handler. And then down here, this will only ever run if we're in a good situation, if you are the owner of this post. So then just to actually delete it, we could say like const delete statement equals db prepare. Let's work backwards. So you would call that or run that. So delete statement dot run. And the only thing you would need to give it is the ID of the post in question. So request.params.id. And then the actual statement could just be delete from the post table where ID equals question mark. After this runs, then we can just redirect them back to the homepage with a list of all of their posts. So response.redirect back to the homepage. And before I even hit save, I would probably go ahead and even go one step further to where none of these lookups even happen if you're not logged in. So in other words, we can use our middleware. So before this function, after the URL pattern, you could just say must be logged in, comma. And then let's do the same thing for the post request to edit a post. So must be logged in, and then just scroll up. Even for viewing the edit screen, must be logged in, comma. Okay, let's save that and let's try to delete a post. So I'm going to try to delete my second amazing post. Okay, off camera, I just figured out a bug. And if you're following along with me, you would have just ran into the exact same bug. So our delete functionality is working perfectly. However, you'll notice that anytime we edit a post, it looks like it updated it, but actually if you go back to your homepage, it's creating a duplicate copy. This is because the edit post form is submitting to the wrong URL. So all we need to do to fix all of this is just go into your edit post page, and the form action, this is the culprit. This is the problem, right? When you submit this form, it should not go to create post. That's going to create a new copy of the post. This should be edit-post / and then the ID in question. So post.id. Let's give that a save. And now let me test out a few things. So let me delete several of these posts. Like if I delete this one, cool, I'll delete this one, and this one, and this one. Okay, now if I try to edit this to say quick test, and then go back to my homepage, Awesome. It did not create a new copy. It just actually updated the post in question. And we're also in business. We can now delete posts. Now let's set it up so that when you view a single post, let's only show these edit and delete buttons if you are the owner of this post. Now from a technical perspective, you could just go into the EJS template and have your if logic there, but I think it's way cleaner and it's a better separation of concerns to perform that check in server.js. So let's find the GET request for editing a post. For me, it's around line 153. And before we return the template with a little bit of data, in here, after the post, let's say comma. Let's also give it like is author, and that's going to be either true or false. Now, above that line, I would just create that property. So I'd say like const is author, and that's going to equal, and then just return true or false. So I would just compare post.authorID. Does that equal request.user.id? Oops, and I just remembered it's not .id, it's user ID. Cool, let's give that a save. And then just go into our EJS template. So what, single post.ejs, and just wrap this in a little bit of EJS logic. So we don't need the equal sign because we're not outputting something. We're just going into JavaScript mode, and I'd say like if, and what do we name it? Is author. So if that's true, and then only if that's true. We don't even need an else, just only if that's true. And then you could close out of EJS there, go into it here, and close it there. And then just move the form and the A element to live inside that block. Let's give that a save. So in this screen, I'm logged in. Whoops, it says is author is not defined. Let's go back to our server. Of course. So I'm in the wrong route pattern. This is for editing a post. So get rid of that. Put this back to just post, and then let's just cut this line into our clipboard. We're going to want it back in 5 seconds from now. And then just find, if you just search for single post, this is the correct route. This is the route we should have been modifying. So in addition to post, comma, is author, and then right above that line, just paste in your clipboard. Cool, let's save, refresh. So I'm logged in, I can see these buttons, but in this window, I am not logged in. So if I refresh, beautiful, I still see the post, but I don't see any options to edit or delete it. Nice. At this point, let's take care of a few more details and finish up our app before we learn how to post it or deploy it live up onto the web. So one detail is on the home page. Let's have this, instead of saying welcome to your dashboard, let's have this say like hello and then your username. Let's go into, what is that, dashboard.ejs. And above the unordered list, maybe instead of a heading level 2, let's have like a heading level 4. And let's say hello. Username, we'll fill that in just a moment. Let's say like, here are your posts. And then to make that dynamic, it would just be EJS user.username. So you can refresh. Cool. But what if you don't have any posts? So if I delete my post, it doesn't really make sense to say here are your posts if you don't have any. So I could even just set up a little bit of extra logic. Maybe right before the heading level 4, we could say like EJS if posts.length, if that equals 0, then let's have a special message. Let me duplicate this, paste it here. Let's be sure to close out of that though. So back EJS, close out of that if, and then else. You get the idea, then move this one in here. This is not exciting. We're not really learning anything new. This is like PHP syntax, basically, old school, traditional PHP. So this one would say like, hello, your username. You do not have any posts yet. Cool, so if I refresh, looks like I have an error in my EJS syntax. Let's see. On this line, I'm missing the opening curly brackets for the if statement, so just an opening one. Let's give that a save. Cool, you do not have any posts yet, but if I create a post really quick, test, amazing content. Go back to the home page, nice. All right, one final detail before we deploy our app up onto the web. Let's set it up so if you create a new post, like what if you wanted to have like an unordered list in your content? Or what if you wanted to have certain text be bold or italic? Or, even just like multiple paragraphs. Because currently, right now, we're just outputting one continuous string of text instead of basic HTML elements like paragraphs, list items, strong tags. So in situations like this, I I mean, you could implement a rich text editor, but I think the simplest option is just to allow Markdown. Trust me, this is going to be a lot easier than it sounds. It should only take us a couple of minutes. So right now, create a new post with me. The title is just plain text, so that can say our Markdown test. But in the body content, do this with me. Say like, this is example asterisk asterisk, bold content, and then like two line breaks, and this is a new paragraph with single asterisks, italic content. So this is a quick example of Markdown. 2 asterisks should make something bold. Auto line breaks like this should create new paragraphs, and single asterisks should make things italic, and then like this syntax should make an ordered list. So red, orange, with the dashes. So you can save that. Now currently we haven't implemented Markdown, so if you view that, again, it's just one big string. So let's go add Markdown support. Here's what I would do. In this tab in our terminal, we're just going to install a package and say npm install. The package we want is called marked. Go ahead and press enter. Let's go import that at the very top of server.js. So we'll just say like const marked equals require, pull in the marked package. And now essentially, if you go to like singlepost.ejs, we're looking for where we output our content. So for me, it's line 16, but just wherever you're actually outputting post.body, we want to interpret this or parse this so that, this would actually turn into a strong tag. This would actually turn into an EM tag, so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is create a utility function in server.js and then just make it available to my template engine. So let's look for our middleware. For me, it's around line 48, right? This function that's going to be used for every route in our entire application. And maybe just right above this errors equals empty array, let's do this. Let's say like make our markdown function available. And we're just going to say response.locals dot, and you can name it anything. You can name it pizza, unicorn. I'm going to call it filter user HTML. And that's going to equal a function, parentheses, curly brackets. You're going to pass into this function just a string of text. Let's call it content, just so you and I are on the same page. And then this function is going to return, well, we're going to use the marked package, but I'm going to wrap it inside of sanitize HTML. Let me explain what I'm doing here. So call sanitize HTML. Markdown allows for all sorts of things, like even image elements and links like A elements. I don't want that. So I essentially want to whitelist only things like paragraphs, unordered lists, like H1s, H2s, H3s, and strong tags. Those are the only things I'm going to allow. So inside of sanitize HTML, let's give it 2 things, A, B. So the first thing, we'll circle back to this in just a moment. That's going to come from Markdown, the string you're trying to sanitize. The second thing we give it is a configuration object. You could drop down in there. We're going to say allowed tags, and that's an array, comma, and then allowed attributes. That's an empty object. Now the array this time for allowed tags, I do want to allow a few elements. So I want to allow the p tag, comma. I want to allow like a line break. I want to allow an unordered list. I want to allow list items. I want to allow ordered lists. I want to allow strong, bold, I element. Let's do like an EM element. And then you don't need to follow along with me, but you get the idea. I'm just going to allow H1 through H6. Cool. Now, anything beyond this, I'm just going to consider it non-essential or malicious or just not necessary. And now the A placeholder, this is where we can use Markdown to, so instead of the A placeholder, we're just going to say marked.parse. Helps if you spell parse correctly. That's a function, and you're just going to give it the incoming string. So what's really cool, the marked package is going to take that incoming string and turn it into HTML. So it's going to turn like asterisk, asterisk into a strong tag, and then we're filtering that. So we can save this, and now let's just go use this really cool function we just built. So we called it filter user HTML. So go back into single post, and instead of this being post.body, a few things here. So leave the EJS block, but get rid of post.body. And instead of an equal sign, let's use a dash. Now remember, equal sign is the safe, escaped way. A dash is like the dangerous, unescaped way of outputting something. So we actually want to output HTML, which could be dangerous, but you and I are being extra careful to filter it. So the dash is okay here, right? And then we're just going to call filter user HTML and give it body.content. Excuse me, not body.content, post.body. Let's give that a save, and if I refresh, beautiful. So this is bold. This is like a line break is an actual separate paragraph. That's italic. That's an unordered list. We're in business. Let's see, back on our homepage, one more thing and then we will deploy, I promise. This is the last detail. Let's actually have our newest posts show up on top, right? The most recent should always be on top. So here's what I would do. Let's go into server.js. Let's just search for dashboard. Cool, so this is the query we're looking for. So at the end of this, where author ID equals question mark, at the very end, we can just tack on order by. And we named that date column what? Created. Actually forgot the name of the date column. Yes, so created date. So created uppercase date. And I can't remember if this would be ascending or descending. Let's try descending and refresh. Whoops, I absolutely spelled that column wrong. It's created uppercase date. So past tense created date. Let's try to save that, refresh. Cool, so yes, descending. Nice, so we could create a new one. Final test. This is great. Go back to the home page. It's on top. Cool. Now, I'm sure there's all sorts of little nice to add features we could add, but at some point we need to draw a line in the sand. Even if there's errors or problems with the app, let's just call it good. We're drawing a line in the sand. Let's say that this is now finished. Now, how in the world do we deploy this live up onto the web? Well, there are all sorts of services that make it really simple, but this is an educational video. So if you wanted to use one of those services that makes it super easy, you don't need a video tutorial. You just give them a Git repo, you hit a button, and your site is live. However, in an educational video like this, we aren't optimizing for things to be as easy as possible. We're optimizing to learn as much as possible. We want universal, transferable skills. So in this video, I want to show you how to set up a Linux machine yourself to host a Node app. Because this is going to result in you feeling truly empowered. This way, you're not learning skills that rely on a certain company or a certain service. You're learning universal DevOps or Linux skills. Now, this brings us to the sponsor of this video, which is DreamHost and their Dream Compute plans. So I've personally used DreamHost for about 19 years for all of my PHP sites. But normally when it comes to hosting Node or Express apps, most people think of the $5 plans from like the traditional cloud VPS companies. Well, what if I told you DreamHost offers $5 a month, well, a wide range of plans, but affordable cloud VPS plans. Right? Where you have complete control. You have full root access. So you can follow along with this Linux and Node.js tutorial using any VPS provider you want, but DreamHost is a company that I really trust. I've used them for almost 2 decades, and they have graciously sponsored this tutorial video and made it freely available here on YouTube. So if you want to try out Dream Compute, we can click on plans, take a look at their affordable prices. So this basic tier, the maximum it would bill you per month is $4.50. If you need more CPUs or RAM, the price can go up from there. But the idea is that for the remainder of this video, I'm going to walk through how to build your own sort of Linux box that hosts our Express app. Personally, I'm going to be using DreamHost's Dream Compute. If you want to learn more about their services and maybe use them yourself, you can find a link in the description to this video to get started. Once again, a huge thank you to DreamHost for sponsoring this tutorial, making it freely available here on YouTube. All right, and now we don't need to walk through step by step, signing up for a DreamHost account, adding your payment method, and, signing up for cloud compute on your account. I'll assume that you can set all of that up. What we want to focus on in this video is then how in the world do you set up your first instance of a cloud compute, virtual server, essentially, a cloud server. And how in the world do we log into Linux and configure it to host our Node application? Cool. So from the Cloud Compute dashboard, it'll look something like this. Before we create our first instance or our first cloud server, let's first, to make your life a lot easier, let's be sure to add in our key pairs. So from the main sidebar menu, click on key pairs. And if you've ever added an SSH key for your computer onto your GitHub account, this is very similar. We're essentially just setting it up so that the server can trust us instead of just letting anyone SSH into it. It does use a different command, though, than the typical github.com way of creating an SSH key. So here's what we're going to do. In your terminal, first you can check to see if you already have the specific type of key that it's looking for. So you could cd into tilde for your home directory and then .ssh and then run an ls. So this, or at least in my experience, this ed25519, that's the typical command and key pair that you would get from setting up github.com with an SSH key. With DreamHost's Dream Compute, you're going to want this. So it's RSA and rsa.pub. So if you see these files, then you already have a pair and you could just go ahead and back in DreamHost Dream Compute, you could just use this import key pair to add yours. If you don't have the RSA files and you only have the ed25519, here's the command you're going to run. It's just ssh-keygen, and then for the arguments, it's -t, and then RSA. Go ahead and press enter, and then just walk through the default options, and then that will generate these files for you. And then if you're trying to see what lives inside this file, you could just say cat, and then the file name, id rsa.pub. And then you can just select that, copy and paste it, and then use that when you're importing your key pair. The idea here, though, is that don't move forward in the video until you have added a key pair here, because that's what's going to get automatically added into your instance, so you have easy SSH access into your machine. Once you've added your key pair, we are ready to create our first instance or our first Dream Compute server. So let's click on Instances in the sidebar, and then we can use this button to create a new instance, Launch Instance. Let's fill out the instance name. I'll call it like our Express app. We can leave the default value for this. We only want 1, so yes. Let's click on Source. Now you can choose, well, first of all, change this to image instead of volume snapshot image. I'll give myself, 20 gigabytes? And then assuming you chose image for this option, if you scroll down, you can choose any Linux distribution that you're the most comfortable with. I'm the most familiar with Ubuntu, so it looks like the newest one that's available is Ubuntu 22.04. So I would just click this arrow to the right to select it. All right, that's all we need for this source tab. Let's click on flavor. And now, depending on your budget, you can choose like how many CPUs, how much RAM, so on and so forth. But just for this little example Express app, probably even the most affordable plan, so this one with 0.5 gig of RAM, even that should do the trick here. So let's click this icon on the right-hand side to select that basic one. And then with that selected, we're ready now. We can click Launch Instance down in the bottom right corner. And then it might take, a few minutes, but be patient. Your cloud server is being created. And so maybe in 10, 20, 30 seconds, we can check back on this screen. It should only take a couple of minutes, but you can see mine is completed. So now we can just use this IP address to log into the machine. So I would just select that IP address into your clipboard, copy that, open up your terminal and say SSH. And now if you chose the Ubuntu image like I did, the username that we're trying to log in with is Ubuntu. You might need to do a little bit of research if you chose a different distribution, but @ and then just paste in the IP address and go ahead and press enter. This is the first time you're connecting to that IP address, so type in yes to trust it, press enter. Cool, and we are in. We are now logged in to that remote server. I think one of the funnest things right away is to see how much RAM is currently being used on a fresh installation. So if you run the command of htop, press enter. Cool, so even though the server only has, 468 megabytes, we're only using 128. You can press Control-C to stop that. If at any time you're sick of the cursor being at the very bottom of your terminal, you can always just say clear, hit enter, cool. At this point, the question becomes, how do we turn this Linux machine into a web server? Because currently, if you take this IP address and copy it into your clipboard, and then in a new tab, if you press enter to try to visit that IP address, you see, some sort of failed message, like you cannot visit that site. So how do we turn it into a web server? Simple. type these commands in with me in your terminal where we're connected to our server. We're going to say, first of all, sudo apt update. This will pull in the newest repositories. Now, it's not going to actually download every package, but it's going to sort of update the catalog of what's available. Okay, and then the industry standard package that we're going to use to turn this into a web server is called Nginx. So to install it, we just say sudo apt install, and the name of the package is Nginx. So it's Nginx. Go ahead and press enter. It's going to ask you yes or no. Do you want to install it? Just type Y for yes, hit enter. Okay, it should take less than a minute to get that installed. And now if you try to visit that URL in your browser, awesome, it's working. Welcome to Nginx. Great, so we're serving up HTML, we're serving up a web page. Let's take it a few steps further now though. We probably don't expect our visitors to visit an IP address in their address bar, right? They're going to visit some sort of like domain, like a .com or a .org or what have you. So the good news is that you can host as many different websites and domains on just one server as you want. Like this one Linux box could host 100 different .com domains. So I'm the owner of learnwebcode.com, but just for good practice, let me show you how to set up like a custom domain so that, for example, we could visit like test.learnwebcode.com and have that take us or like use this IP address. In other words, I want to set things up for the purposes of, this educational video. Imagine I wanted test.learnwebcode.com to serve up this Express application. So remember a second ago when I said that one server can host, the websites for like 100 different domains? Right now, let me show you how we can set up like a separate Nginx site on our server for that domain, that test.learnwebcode.com domain. Well, you would set this up with a domain that you own, with a different domain than me, but you can follow along and just change that one detail. So anyways, when you visit your IP address, and again, yours would be different than mine, but when you visit the IP address, that's sort of the default Nginx site. At this point, we want to create a custom Nginx entry or site for a specific domain. So let me show you how we would do that. We're just going to go into our terminal, and let's just create like a static HTML file that says, welcome to our new website. I just want to show you how you can host multiple domains within Nginx. So, you could host it anywhere, but let's do this. Let's cd into like the root, so /var/www, run an ls. So currently, I believe that's where the default Nginx website lives. Inside of that folder, let's create a new folder. So make directory, or mkdir is the command to create a new folder. And I'll just name the folder test.learnwebcode.com. Okay. Whoops, you can see that command failed. I would need to begin that command. So by the way, to get the previous command that you just ran, just press the up key, the up arrow key on your keyboard. And then we would just need to begin that line with sudo. So at the very start of the line, sudo. I think the technically correct pronunciation is sudo, not sudo, but old habits die hard. I always say sudo. Okay, then you could run an ls to see what's in there. I do a cd into that. So if you start to type in a directory, you can hit tab on your keyboard, and that should sort of get you like the autocomplete. You can press enter. In that new folder, I would create a file. So touch is the command to create a file, and then the name of the file you want. Let's call it index.html. That's embarrassing. You would need sudo touch index.html. Okay, and then to edit that file, we could say sudo. You could use Vim if you're feeling brave, but for the purposes of this video, I think I'm going to use Nano. Nano is a simple command line text editor, and the name of the file is index.html. Okay, and then we could just say like, heading level 1 and say, welcome to our example new website with 3 exclamations, close out the H1. To save this file and exit, you're going to hit Control X. It's going to say, do you want to save? Just hit Y for yes, and then hit enter to keep that same file name. Cool, so now that's the file we want to serve up. Now let's go create a separate Nginx entry, or like a separate Nginx, sort of like listing that points towards that new file. It's specifically for our new domain of test.learnwebcode.com. So this did not set up, this folder was just like an aptly named folder that did not create anything to do with the domain. Here's what we're going to do. Let me cd just back to the root of the server, just so the command prompt doesn't take up half of my screen. And let me go back up to the top of the screen. Type this in with me. Sudo nano, and then this needs to be exact. We're going to say /etc/nginx/sites-available, and then we're going to create a brand new file called test dot, and this would be whatever your domain is. So be sure to enter your domain here, not mine, but then go ahead and press enter. Okay, we're back into Nano. We just need to type in a little bit of boilerplate, but it's going to go quick. Let's say server, opening and closing curly bracket, in between the curly brackets, let's say listen on port 80, semicolon, server underscore name is test.learnwebcode.com, semicolon, drop down a couple times, let's say root, and this is /var/www/ oops, only 3 W's, test.learnwebcode.com, semicolon, and then let's just say index.html, index.htm, just to be safe, right? Like a few fallbacks. And then finally, we can say location / opening and closing curly bracket in between the middle of those. So right here, let's say try underscore files $URI space $URI / space equals 404 semicolon. Let's save this file and close it out. So Control X is going to say yes or no, hit Y, hit enter. Okay, now we need to copy that file from this Nginx sites available into, there's another folder called sites enabled. So we're essentially trying to now enable this new site. So here's what we're going to say, sudo, and we're technically not copying the file, we're creating a symbolic link. So ln and then a space -s. So where is it pulling from, or where is it originating from? /etc/nginx/sites-available /test.learnwebcode.com, a space, and then you spell out the new directory where we want sort of that shortcut or alias or symbolic link to live in. So it's /etc/nginx/sites-enabled/. Go ahead and press enter. Okay, and now our final step before I go and set up this actual subdomain on my real website is we need to make sure that the permissions for that directory where the files live make sense. So let's say sudo chown, give it the $R flag, and then we're going to say $user $user /var www test.learnwebcode.com. Enter, and then one more command, sudo chmod -R 755, and then just the same folder. So var www test.learnwebcode.com. Cool. Now we can restart Nginx by saying sudo systemctl reload Nginx. Go ahead and press enter. Okay, and now at this point, I'm just going to log in for the dashboard for my real domain, and I'm going to create a new A record for a subdomain of test.learnwebcode.com, and all I have to do is point it towards my IP address for my Linux box. All right, so here is my main real-world website and domain, learnwebcode.com. I'll just click on DNS record, and adding a subdomain is really easy. We're just going to click add record, and then you would want an A record. So click on that, click add an A record. So you just start typing in this first field. I want it to be test, and then it's, this part's filled in for me, test.learnwebcode, points to, and then in this field, you just paste in the IP address for your Dream Compute server. Yours will be different than mine, but right, you can always find that from the Dream Compute Instances tab. It's the same IP address that you SSH'd into from your terminal. Just click on add record. Now, your dashboard will be different depending on which company you registered your domain through. But typically, when you add an A record, it could take a good 10, 15, 20 minutes. So you might want to go get a snack and come back to the computer. So for example, I just tried to visit test.learnwebcode, and we see this site can't be reached. Through the magic of video editing, I'll just edit out that awkward 20 to 30 minute wait. Okay, here we are. I only had to wait about 5 minutes, but there you can see test.learnwebcode.com. Right, this is that HTML file we created from the command line on our server. Now, right away, you'll notice that in your browser, you see a warning that this is not secure. What this means is that we are not using HTTPS yet. This is just HTTP. Now, in about 2 minutes from now, I'll walk through with you how to set up secure HTTPS. But before we get to that, I first want to show you that now we can connect to our server using the domain instead of the IP address. So in the terminal where you're logged into your server, to close out that SSH connection, you can just type in exit and press enter. Cool, so now I'm back on my personal laptop. Now check this out. If I want to connect to my server now, you could still say SSH Ubuntu at and then the IP address for your server, but now we can just say SSH Ubuntu at, and for me, your domain is different, but for me the domain is test.learnwebcode.com. And this is just a one-time thing, but you'll have to trust that host. So type yes and hit enter. Cool, and I'm back on my server. We can run htop to see how much RAM we're using. So even though we installed Nginx and I can refresh this, we're serving up a web page, it looks like we're still only using about 140 megabytes. Cool, you can press Control-C to stop that. Now let's go ahead and set up HTTPS. Right, we want a secure encrypted connection. This is actually a lot easier than you might assume it would be. So in our SSH connection on your server, type this in with me. We're going to say sudo apt install, and we want two different packages. The first is called certbot, like a certification, certbot, and then a space. The other package we want is python 3-certbot-nginx. Go ahead and press enter. It's going to ask you yes or no, so type Y for yes. We do want to install those. Looks like there's a newer kernel available. Let's just press OK or enter to move forward. From this screen again, I'll just press enter to move forward. Okay, so now that we've installed those two packages, what's really cool is we don't need to go into our Nginx file and manually add in new code to enable HTTPS. Instead, we're just one command away and it will do that for us. So we can just say sudo certbot space -- nginx, and then a space -- d, and then just the name of your domain. So mine was, yours will be different, but for me it's test.learnwebcode.com. Go ahead and press enter. That is going to do everything for us in terms of setting up HTTPS. Now your HTTP certificate will need to be renewed every so often, so go ahead and enter your email address just so you're notified of any upcoming renewals. Do you accept the terms of service? I'll just hit Y for yes, hit enter. Once the certificate is successful, do I want to share my email address? I'll say no. So N for no. It's requesting a certificate. I can't imagine this will take longer than maybe 20 seconds. And it's done. So now if I go back to my website and refresh, I believe as soon as I hit refresh, we will not see this any longer. It'll be secure. Yep. And it's that easy. So now our website is using secure, encrypted HTTPS. At this point, now we're actually ready to focus on, getting the Node.js environment to host our app set up on our server. Now, currently, like our Linux machine does not come with Node installed by default. So like if I say Node version, right, command not found. However, I do not want to use the built-in Ubuntu repositories to install Node because I'm pretty sure that's going to get you a very outdated version. I want the current LTS version of Node, which is Node version 20. Right? Or even if you wanted the newest version, that's Node 22. Or, whenever you're watching this video, it's going to be a higher number. But let me show you what I would do. From the official Node website, I'm not going to click this download link because that will actually download a file. I want to go to the download page, so in the header. Okay, and then let's see, what are the options here? Install Node on. I'm sure this would work. NVM is a great tool, but I was sort of looking for just a very basic, just one version of Node without Node Version Manager. Now I remember a website called like Node Source. So if you scroll down a little bit, yes, this link, check out other community supported package managers. So I'm still on the official Node website. And then here are the different Linux distributions. I'm looking for this one, Debian and Ubuntu based Linux distributions. If I click on that, yes, so this was the link I had in mind. So Node.js binary distributions are available from Node Source. I'm going to click this link. Okay, and from this GitHub repo, we should be able to find some really easy instructions here. So yes, I want the Debian and Ubuntu based distributions. Cool, and I'll actually just go ahead and install the newest version, not the LTS, just the absolute newest. So looks like it's version 22. I'm pretty sure we already have curl on our machine. I'm not even going to bother checking. I'm just going to assume we have that. So then this command is all we need. So just copy that into my clipboard, just paste it in here, press enter. Okay, and then it looks like there was one other command. It says run the script with sudo. So again, you could just copy that, paste it here. It looks like there was one final step. Yes, install node. So I'll get that copied into my clipboard. As soon as this finishes, whoops, go ahead and press OK on that kernel warning. Press OK. Okay, and then I'm ready for that final step. So I'll just paste in my clipboard. Go ahead and press enter. I'll just go ahead and hit OK again. We're going to reboot very soon anyways. Click OK or enter. Okay, it finished. So now let me run a clear just to go back up to the top. So now you can test this by saying node -- version. We're in business. We now have node version 22. This is awesome. So now let's just think about, back in like VS Code, how are we going to get all of our source code files up onto our Linux machine? The answer is always, to any question like that, right? The answer is Git. We're going to use Git. But in this video, I don't want to walk through how to set up like a bare repo and use your Linux box as a Git host that you could push to, because that's just going to add like an extra 20-30 minutes of configuration. So to keep this as easy as possible, here's what I think we should do. Again, not that this is what I would do in the real world, but I think this is the quote-unquote easiest way. I would just make sure that you don't have any secure or sensitive information in your repo, and then I would just push this as a public GitHub repo and then just pull it down on the Linux machine. Maybe in a future video, I'll walk through how you can set up your server to be a Git server or Git host, but for now, let's keep this as easy as possible. In the root of your project in VS Code, let's create a new file, and it needs to have this exact name. It's called .gitignore. In this file, let's spell out like we absolutely don't want to include .env, because that's going to contain sensitive information, right? So we don't want this publicly available on GitHub. Now again, in the real world, you wouldn't need your repo to be public. You could make sure that your server has access to it, so on and so forth. But I'm just trying to get things so we're basically like one command away from pulling down the source code on our server, just to keep this video quick. But I would also ignore the node modules folder. And I would also ignore my database. Like, let's start with a fresh copy of the database on production. So I'd say like our app.db, our app.db-shm, and our app.db-wall. Cool, so that's it. Those are the only files that would contain sensitive information. Everything else, I'm fine with it being open source, right? So I'm not going to walk through this with you, but now just go ahead and create a Git repo and push it up to your GitHub account. And because we don't have anything sensitive in here, it's totally fine for that to be a public repo. All right, so off camera, that's what I just did. I just created my own public repo with the code that we've been writing together in this video. So now on my server in the terminal, let me just pull down those files from the public GitHub repo. Now, where do we want those files? Why don't we cd into /var/www. Now, currently that has this folder. Now, there's nothing special about that folder. That's just where I placed like the old-fashioned static HTML file that you currently see here. But you don't need to keep your files in there. Especially with a Node or Express app, you just need to run the app, and then it doesn't matter where the files live. We're just going to be sort of forwarding a port or proxying a port. So just in this var www folder, I'm just going to run git clone and then my repo, and it will create a subfolder on its own. So git clone htt. You know what? I'm probably going to need a sudo at the start of this. So I have permission sudo git clone and then https : you get the idea, : and then for mine, and yours will be different, but github.com/learn-webcode, and my repo was called YouTube-Express-SQLite. Go ahead and press enter. It's already done. So now if I run an ls, awesome, we have that subfolder, YouTube Express SQLite. Let's go into that folder. So if I just say cd and start to type YouTube, hit tab on my keyboard, awesome. You can run an ls to see what's in there. Cool. Let's go ahead and run an npm install, and then we should see a node modules folder, right? So if we just say npm install, it should be pretty quick. I forgot sudo. I believe there's a way to set this up where you wouldn't need that, but that's definitely like the quick and easy solution, right? Just sudo npm install. Cool, so now if we run an ls, yep, there's the node modules folder with everything we would need. Before we try to start our application, let's make sure we create an env file. So you could say touch to create the file, but if you just say nano and then the name of the file, so nano space .env, that will create the file for us when we try to exit this. And you know what, I led you astray, I forgot sudo. Let me close out of that. We're gonna probably want sudo nano.env. All right, in this file, you would just need to have, if you look at your file on your personal computer, so we just had the one variable and we named it, and you need to be consistent here. So JWT secret. So just all uppercase, JWT secret equals, and now the value doesn't need to match. So just type something in that is super duper secure that nobody could guess. You get the idea. Let's go ahead and Control X. Do we want to save it? Yes, we do. Keep the file name. Awesome. Now let's actually start our application. So we would just say node, right? We're not going to use npm run dev. In this live production environment, you would say node and then the file name, which is server. So node server. It looks like SQLite doesn't have permissions. We probably just need to set proper permissions on this folder that we're in. So I would just say sudo chown $R $user $user. And then let's just try a dot for the current folder that we're already in. And then I would also say sudo chmod -r 755. And then again, dot for the current folder we're in. And then let's try to spin up our server again. So let's try node server. Awesome, we don't see any error messages. I'm pretty sure that means our application is up and running in the background. Now remember, it's running on port 3000, and I don't believe we can access that. Like if I try to tack on a :3000 on the address bar, by default, I don't believe port 3000 is going to be publicly available. So this would just spin forever and never actually load or serve anything up. However, we do know that our application is up and running on the server. I mean, you can press Control C, and if you run an ls, notice it created those SQLite database files. So it was indeed up and running. We just couldn't access it. So now, the final step in this tutorial is to adjust our Nginx entry for, let me get rid of that port number. Adjust our Nginx entry for this domain or this site to simply proxy or serve up the port that's on port 3000. Right, so like regular HTTP is on port 80, HTTPS I believe is on port 443, so we just want to make whatever is on port 3000, which is our Node app, we want to make that available on 443, HTTPS. So back in our server, let's just edit our Nginx entry for this site. I can't remember exactly where it lives, but I think it starts with, so cd/ for the root, etc nginx, run an ls, yep. So we're interested in this sites available folder. So cd sites, if you just start to hit tab, cool, sites available. Yes, so I want to edit this file, test.learnwebcode.com. So I'll just say sudo nano test.learnwebcode.com. Cool. We just need to make a few adjustments to this file. First of all, if we scroll down to the very bottom, we don't need this second server object that certbot has set up for us. So I would just delete this entire secondary server block. And a quick shortcut in Nano, wherever your cursor is, if you press Control K, that will just remove that line. So you could just, it's a very quick way to delete multiple lines. Okay, and then up towards the start of our server block, let's get rid of this root line. Let's also get rid of this index line. Get rid of that empty line. And now inside of location, this is where I would tell it to just look at localhost :3000, or port 3000. So I would say proxy _ pass. And I'm not going to claim to understand all of this. I Googled this code and I'm just borrowing it. So let's type it out quickly together. So http / localhost port 3000 semicolon proxy http version 1.1 semicolon proxy set header upgrade $http _ upgrade proxy set header connection quotes upgrade proxy set header host $host, and then finally proxy cache bypass. $HTTP upgrade. Okay, so now we just have one server block, and it's listening on port 443, which is great. That's the HTTPS port. But now I am going to manually, up at the very top of this file, the very top, create my own secondary server block. So let's say server, curly brackets, and inside of those, it's going to be almost identical, or basically identical to what certbot created for us, but I just don't want certbot managing these lines of code. The job of this server block is just to listen on port 80, so HTTP, not HTTPS, and just return, or sort of redirect to the HTTPS version. So let's say listen on port 80, semicolon. Server name would be the same. So for me, test.learnwebcode.com. And then for location, in between the curly brackets, we'll just say return 301 HTTPS : $//$host $request _URI semicolon. Let's go ahead and save this file. So Control X, hit Y for yes, keep the same file name. And now I can't remember if we need to manually tell Nginx to use that new change. We could try it without it, but I think it wouldn't hurt to just say sudo systemctl reload Nginx. Cool. Now, if we refresh, we probably will see like bad gateway or yes, because our app isn't running on port 3000, but this is really good news. Now we're just one command away. So let's just go back to where we have our Express app. So it was in what? cd/var www. Oops, I had 4 W's. Yes, the YouTube folder. So cd YouTube Express. Just in that folder, run a node server. So now it's up and running on port 3000. That's going to run forever. And if we go back to the browser and refresh, moment of truth, there is our Express app running live on the public web. So you could share this URL with your friends and family, and they would be using something that you coded from and deployed from scratch. Let's try to create an account. So I'll say kitty doe, QWERTY. Create a few posts here. My first public post. This is awesome. Right? And then there's your URL. You could share that with anyone and they can view it. Cool. There is one final detail though we need to take care of, and that is, and you're probably screaming at the screen right now, whoops, you definitely can remove all of those console.logs that we had for development purposes. That would not be necessary on live or production, but that's not the issue at hand. The issue at hand is if I press Control-C to stop that node server task, our website breaks. So you can't expect your server to have that task like in the forefront running manually. Because also, like, what if you restarted your server? What I'm getting at here is we need some sort of way to have that application be running, or that task of node server, and then running our app. That needs to run at all times in the background, even if the system gets turned off and turned on and restarted. Like, that just needs to always be running. Otherwise, our site isn't available. So the final step in this video is to use something called PM2 so that indeed our Express app is just always running. Luckily for us, this is very easy to set up. So let me say clear to start up at the top here. And we're just going to say sudo npm install, but we want to install something globally. So it doesn't even matter what folder you're in when you run this. But -G for something globally on the entire system, and the name of the package that we want is PM2. So go ahead and press enter. If you want to, you can confirm that that's now globally available by saying PM2, -- version. Cool, so that's available, and now we're just going to use it. Now, for the command that I'm about to run, this does matter where you're located. You would need to be in the folder. So like if I run an ls, you want to be in the folder where, your server.js file lives. But then run this command with me. PM2 start, and then the name of your file. So it's server.js. Cool. So now, even though like it doesn't look like a task is running, it's running in the background. So like you can refresh your site, it's available. Now, let's go one step further. Let's set it up so that you don't even need to ever run this command again. Let's set it up so that even if the machine reboots or restarts or gets powered off and on, it just automatically starts our server up for us. All you do is just say PM2 startup, press enter, And then it literally gives you a command that you can just copy and paste. So I would start selecting from sudo, just take that entire line, copy it into my clipboard, press paste, hit enter. Let's save that just to be safe. So I'll say pm2 save, and I believe that's it. So now this is pretty fun. Let's try to turn our machine off, like reboot it, restart it. Actually, do we need sudo for that? We probably do. Let's try. Yeah, absolutely need that. So say sudo reboot, and that's going to make your server go down for maybe like 10, 20, 30 seconds. So you can see my SSH connection immediately failed. Now, you won't be able to visit the website because that, it's actually restarting. You can see it's unavailable. So now it's booting up, right? Like it's the machine is actually just, well, there it goes. It's already halfway back up. And then if you refresh in another 2 seconds, awesome. So now you and I don't need to worry about that Node app running. It's just going to, as long as the computer is powered on, the Node app will be running. So our application is 100% complete, but just for extra security, why don't we make sure we have at least a very basic firewall up and running? So back in your command line, we would need to reconnect to the server. So that is ssh ubuntu at, for me, it's test.learnwebcode.com. Okay, I'm back in. Just out of curiosity, if I run an htop, this is awesome. So you can see even running a Node and Express app, we're still only using 168 megabytes of RAM. I mean, that's just so awesome to me. I don't know why. That just makes my day. But anyways, let's press Control-C. And we're going to use something called UFW, which is short for Uncomplicated Firewall. I believe it's installed by default. So like if we say UFW version, yep, it's already installed. So what I want to do right now is I want to block every port except for 80 SSH, right? Because if you accidentally block the SSH port, then you've essentially locked yourself out of the machine. You can't log back into it. But so we're going to block everything except for HTTP, HTTPS, and SSH. So I would just say like sudo UFW allow 22/TCP. That's the SSH port. Press enter. Let's also say sudo UFW allow 443. That's for HTTPS /TCP. And then let's just turn on our firewall. So sudo UFW enable. Don't run this command until you are sure that you've ran this command, because if you haven't allowed the SSH port, then you could essentially lock yourself out. Now, this isn't a production application, so you wouldn't be in any trouble, but you would just need to go back into your DreamHost instances and maybe log in there, but you wouldn't be able to log in from your terminal. But anyways, let's go ahead and say sudo UFW enable. It's even warning you, right? Like, unless you know what you're doing, that could lock you out. Are you sure? Just say Y for yes. Cool. And then you could always say sudo UFW status to see what's going on. And I just remembered, in order for our upgrade from HTTP to HTTPS, the redirect and all that to work across the board, we are going to want to allow port 80. So I would say sudo UFW allow 80/TCP. And then to make sure that takes effect, we should say sudo UFW reload. Cool, so I can refresh. Our website is still being served. We're still in a SSH connection. Things are looking good. You have now created from scratch your own back-end application, right? You're working with a database and you have deployed it up onto the web. I think it's going to make you feel amazing about your new skills to share your site with friends and family. Like, have them actually create an account, create a few posts, share a few URLs, so on and so forth, right? And just have it sink in that you just completed a very real-world task. Once again, a huge, huge thank you to DreamHost for sponsoring this tutorial and making it freely available here on YouTube. Again, if you're looking for an affordable way to spin up Linux boxes and experiment, right, just like we did in this video, then be sure to check out DreamHost's Dream Compute plans. Finally, if you enjoyed this video, you might enjoy my full premium courses. My official website is learnwebcode.com. Thank you so much for watching this video until the very end. I hope you feel like you learned something, and stay tuned for more web development tutorials. Take care.